Chapter 886. After leaving the hotel, Dean called a carriage and prepared to go out of the city. Dean smoothly passed the interrogation of the guards with the proof of identity given by Lozic and a stack of gold notes. After leaving the capital, he took Aisha to the suburbs of the wilderness. Along the way, they encountered a lot of wolves, tigers, leopards, snakes, and strange insects. Fortunately, these things were nothing to Dean. After more than 3 hours of travel, he found the cave where the package was originally hidden. There was a 6 or 7 meters long python entrenched in the cave. There were traces of fighting at the entrance of the cave, as well as the bloody bones of the beast. Looking at the python, there were not only 2 fangs in its mouth, but a mouth full of dense teeth. At first glance, it was obvious that it did not simply swallow the prey whole into its belly to digest. Dean stepped into the cave. When the python pounced from the dark, he raised his hand and swung the splitter on the python's head. The python's head tilted, and it hit the rock wall and fainted. Dean did not pay attention to it. He went to the depths of the cave, dug the soil, took out the backpack, and left the cave. He found a more spacious and comfortable place in the mountain forest, leaning against a small waterfall and a pool. He sat on a rock and quickly opened the backpack. He glanced at the bottom of the backpack and picked up the seal jar of crystal worm. Using his X-ray vision, he saw that it was full of dark silver mucus. Dean's eyes were dignified. He used the splitter to lift the lid of the jar and saw that it was full of silver mucus. It seemed to be solidified, but it also seemed to be flowing. Dean was already prepared. His figure flashed and disappeared from the place. After a moment, he came back like a gust of wind. In his hand was a tiger that was 3 or 4 meters long. The tiger was held by Dean like a big cat. It struggled and roared, but no matter how it twisted its head, it couldn't bite Dean. Dean threw the slightly mutated tiger next to the jar. The tiger's fiery red hair stood up, and it glared at Dean. It was ready to pounce, but it did not directly rush toward Dean. Its simple thinking told it that the human in front of it was very dangerous. When it growled and tried to scare Dean away, a sudden change occurred. The dark silver mucus in the jar beside the red-haired tiger's feet suddenly leaped up like poisonous snakes and wrapped around the tiger's hind legs that were closest to it. This sudden change alarmed the tiger. It roared angrily and wanted to jump away, but its retreat was already entangled. Soon, the silver mucus spread all over its body, drilling into its fur. Dean's pupils shrank as he saw this scene. Although he expected that this thing was not completely dead, but he did not expect that it could survive after staying in the tank without oxygen for so long. Was this a living creature? This was beyond the scope of living things, wasn't it? Dean immediately used his X-ray vision to observe. He was shocked to see the mercury mucus drilling into the red-haired tiger's body. Like a spiral silk thread, it dispersed and densely covered the tiger's bones, flesh, internal organs, and other organs. At a glance, the tiger's body had formed a silver intertwined net, and the net was spreading rapidly from the back half to the front half, and then along the neck into the brain. Roar! The tiger suddenly roared when the mercury mucus drilled into the tiger's brain, but the next moment it was silent. There was no previous painful roar or roar. It was suddenly quiet. It stood there quietly as the wind from the forest blew past, bringing with it a faint chill. Dean saw the silver mesh quickly covered the whole brain of the tiger. He had an ominous premonition and a creepy feeling in his heart. The next moment, Dean saw the tiger's body shake slightly. Then he saw the tiger slowly raise its head. The original amber eyes were now a bit bloodshot. It looked a bit strange. Still not giving up? Dean saw the tiger's eyes and slightly frowned. Roar! The next moment, the tiger suddenly rushed over. Its speed was as fast as lightning. It was like a red flame passing in front of Dean's eyes. Dean's body suddenly flashed sideways to avoid the tiger's attack. He raised his hand and chopped down with the splitter. Puff! The head of the tiger fell to the ground. Blood gushed out from the broken neck, but a part of it stopped. The wound was quickly covered with silver web-like mucus, which seemed to stop the injury. Then a strange scene appeared. The headless tiger turned around and looked at Dean with its broken neck. Dean's face changed slightly. He was not afraid of the crystal desolate worm, but the strangeness of this thing refreshed his understanding again and again. Suddenly, a creeping sound came from the ground and the sound of fallen leaves being stirred. Dujian's face changed again. He saw that the tiger's head was cut off, and many silver whiskers were growing out. They were like small sprouts, and they were crawling toward the tiger. Dean felt sour in his teeth. What the hell was that? Although he had a premonition of what was going to happen next, he did not stop it. Instead, he wanted to see the scene. As he wished, after the tiger's head crawled to the tiger's feet, the silver mucus immediately gushed out from the tiger's severed neck like dozens of tiny silver blood vessels, winding down. The tiger's head on the ground also flipped over. The two silver mucus met and immediately stuck together, pulling the tiger's head up and back to the severed neck. Other than the hair at the wound that was stuck together by the blood, no one could tell that the head had been chopped off. Roar! The tiger roared again. Dean stared for a moment and sighed. He did not expect that the head was not only connected, but could also be used again. This showed that all aspects of the tissues were reconnected and healed. It also showed how difficult it was to deal with the crystal worm. Dead but not dead, it's talking about you. Dean quietly looked at it. Although he was shocked by the strange ability of the crystal wasteland worm, he was not afraid. Today he was not the same as before. Judging from the speed of the tiger controlled by the crystal wasteland worm, he knew that it was not his opponent. Whoosh! While Dean was thinking, the tiger pounced again and suddenly opened its mouth. Dean suddenly came back to his senses. He was shocked and hurriedly dodged. Puff! A white light flashed, and with a bang, it hit the pool behind Dean. The next moment, there was a cracking sound. Dean hurriedly glanced at it, and his face slightly changed. He saw that the undercurrent surging in the pool had instantly frozen. Dean was secretly frightened. Sure enough, he still could not be careless. Whoosh! The tiger opened its mouth again towards Dean. Dean narrowed his eyes. The moment it opened its mouth, his figure flashed, and he dodged. Although the tiger could still use the crystal wasteland worm's moves, the power was not reduced, but the speed was a lot slower. After Dean noticed this, he quickly approached the tiger while dodging for the second time. He swung his sword and cut horizontally. The tiger wanted to jump away to escape, but its speed was too slow. In Dean's eyes, it was like slow motion. Puff! The saber cut horizontally from the tiger's nose to its waist. It could be said that the tiger's body was cut into two. With the sharpness of the sword, it should be easy to cut, but after being controlled by the crystal worm, the strength of the tiger's bones and the toughness of its internal organs had multiplied, so the sword could not directly cut the tail. Dean looked at the white whiskers wriggling on the wound. His face was slightly cold. He suddenly raised the ice claws and waved them down from the tiger's back. Bang! The ground shook, and the tiger lay on the ground. There was a huge pit under its body. Dean pulled out his sword and cut 3 times in a row. The tiger's body was immediately cut into several pieces. Dean split its head into several pieces and coldly looked at the dismembered body on the ground. Although the crystal worm controlled the tiger and broke out a strong fighting power, the tiger's foundation was relatively weak. Although the bones and internal organs were strengthened, it could not support the eruption of too high a power. It was barely at the level of inner desolate level. Even if Dean had the same strength as before, he could easily dismember its body. However, to be able to raise an ordinary mutant creature to the level of inner desolate level in a short time was quite terrifying. Dean looked at the broken body on the ground and frowned slightly. He jumped to the side and quickly split a few trees. Then he took out a match, peeled the bark, and ignited it. The leaves and bark quickly burned. Dean used the firewood to surround the broken corpses on the ground. Soon, white foam emerged from the corpses closest to the fire, but if you looked closely, you would find that it was a strand of silver wire. The next moment, these silver wires crawled out of the corpses and gathered in the center of the fire ring. It was too difficult to move the body, but the speed of the silver wires was very fast, like a very small snake. Dean saw the dense silver wires drilled out of the body and gathered in the largest body in the center of the flame. He chuckled and sprinkled a handful of leaves on the tiger's back. Then he popped out a match and ignited the leaves. The tiger's hair was the first to burn, and then the whole body was burning. Squeak! Dean heard a harsh scream from the flame. He could not help but raise his eyebrows. He did not expect that this thing could make sound. This vitality could no longer be described with the word tenacious. When the flame extinguished, Dean saw a pool of silver mucus curled up under the burnt body. The silver mucus and the burnt body formed a sharp contrast. Dean used the sword to move the body and put the silver mucus into a jar. At this moment, the area of the silver mucus had shrunk greatly. It was less than 1/3 of the previous size. Nevertheless, it was still as big as a football. Dean put it in a jar, set up a fire rack next to it, and put the jar on top of it. This crystal worm should be called ice worm now. According to the records of the temple, its vitality was extremely tenacious and terrifying. It was very difficult to kill it. Dismembering, suffocation, burying, and other methods were all ineffective. But there was only one way to kill it, and that was to burn it. Iceworm was afraid of fire. Even if the temperature of the flame was average, it was not willing to get close to it. Even if it was a flame of average temperature, it would cause greater damage to it. The first step to absorb the iceworm was to kill it. Dean thought that it would be dying after being sealed in the jar for so long. But the scene just now was a slap in the face. This thing was still alive, and he could only burn it with fire. As the flames grew stronger and stronger, ear-piercing screams came from the jars hanging on the racks. Moreover, it wasn't just one scream, but countless screams. It was as if there were countless babies and children hiding in the jars, screaming in pain. After a while, the sound gradually weakened. Dean continued to add firewood, and the jar was still burning. A few hours later, Dean chopped a few trees nearby, chopped them into firewood, and added them to the fire, but there was no change in the jar. There were no screams and no movement. On the way, Dean tried to touch the jar, and to his surprise, the jar turned out to be cold. It had been burning on a fire for so long, but the jar was cold. One must know that the jar was made of metal. It had excellent heat transfer. Even if it was burned for half a minute, it would be extremely hot, let alone a few hours. No wonder there are no bubbles in it. I was wondering why it didn't boil. Dean muttered and continued to add firewood. This thing wouldn't die so easily. It just showed that this thing was rare and rare. The fire lasted for a whole day. Dean was still burning firewood as the sun went down. Fortunately, he was surrounded by woods. There was no shortage of trees. Moreover, he only burned 7 or 8 trees for a whole day. Dean looked at the sky, which was gradually turning yellow. He looked up and saw the sunset. He didn't expect that time would pass so fast. He reached out and touched the jar. It was still cold, but not as cold as before. Dean sighed in his heart. He continued to add firewood to make the fire more vigorous. At around 12 o'clock in the evening, Dean paid close attention to the metal jar on the fire. After so long, the jar was somewhat warm. Who would have thought that the extreme ice worm, which was afraid to even touch a match, would be able to endure for so long when it was roasted over a fire? After another 2 hours, bubbles slowly appeared in the jar. There were signs of boiling. Dean was excited and continued to add firewood. The night passed. By the dawn of the next day, the jar was completely boiling. However, the boiling bubbles did not splash around. Instead, they were sticky and undulating in the jar. Dean continued to add firewood until noon. The mucus in the jar also boiled until noon. Then it shrank again. Only half the volume of a football was left. Dean waited for the firewood to extinguish. He put the hot jar on the ground. After a while, he saw that the boiling gradually subsided. He quickly left. In less than 2 minutes, he returned with a 4 or 5 meters long python in his hand. The python was lying softly in his hand. He didn't know if it was dead or unconscious. Dean cut a wound on the python's body and threw it to the side of the jar. He waited quietly. After 2 hours, the metal jar was completely cooled down. Dean put the python's head against the mouth of the jar and sat next to it. The day passed quickly. In the evening, there was still no movement in the jar. Chapter 887. Dean stood a few meters away and used his X-ray vision to observe the movements of the insects inside the jar. The 3 worms that had sunk into the mucus were struggling violently, and not long after, they slowly suffocated to death. The last worm crawled to the side of the can. Its body was very light, as if it could walk on water, and the mucus was like walking on flat ground. However, it seemed to be very panicked. After crawling to the side of the can, it kept climbing up, but the inside of the metal can was very smooth. Every time it climbed a few centimeters, it would slide down. However, it repeated several times, but the insect was still persevering. If not for the silver mucus, just looking at this little worm alone would have been an inspirational story. After 10 minutes, the insect was finally exhausted and resigned to its fate. It lay on the inside of the metal jar and was unable to move. Its legs were lifted from time to time as it wanted to climb up, but it seemed to be powerless. Dean stared at the silver mucus. The reason why he looked for the serpent and the insects was to verify whether the silver mucus was still alive or not. According to the records of the temple, the ice worms could be killed with fire, but it didn't say how long to use fire. It was probably because the temperature of different flames was different, so there was no detailed record. But it said that the ice worm would melt into liquid after being burned. If there was no reaction, then it would be completely dead. That's why he looked for the serpent and the insects. However, he had already suffered from the flesh and blood of the origami. This time, he did not dare to believe what was written in the book. Perhaps the extreme ice worm was not completely dead. It was just that it was too heavily injured to fight. Dean planned to observe it for a few more days to be on the safe side. In the blink of an eye, Dean stayed in the woods for 3 days. He looked for all kinds of beasts and poisonous insects. He threw them to the side of the metal jar to test its reaction, but there was still no reaction. Dean tried to scoop out a small part of the liquid and knocked out a cheetah. He took the blood from its neck and dripped on the liquid. The blood flowed onto the silver mucus, but it was like it flowed onto glass. Dean continued to observe for a while. He was relieved to see that the silver mucus didn't even absorb fresh blood. He knew that once bitten, twice shy. In fact, through his X-ray vision, he saw that there was no change in the internal structure of the silver mucus. It was obvious that it was completely dead. Dean scooped out part of the mucus and poured it into the metal jar. The mucus concentration was high. Although the blood of the cheetah was sprinkled on it, it didn't mix with the mucus. Dean took out the syringe and other auxiliary tools. The process of absorbing the ice worm wasn't cumbersome. It was similar to upgrading the magic marks. He injected the ice worm into the nest and let the magic marks absorb it. There were 2 main difficulties. The first was to completely kill the extreme ice worm, and the second was to endure the pain during the transformation. Now that the first point had been solved by Dean, the next step was to endure the pain. The price of failure in either of these 2 points was death. This was also something that was emphasized in the book, especially to completely wipe out the extreme ice worm. It was said that many sovereigns had failed to completely wipe out the extreme ice worm's consciousness after obtaining the extreme ice worm. Instead, they had become slaves to the extreme ice worm. As for the second point, if one couldn't endure the pain, he would faint. In the worst case, he would have a nervous breakdown. This was an injury that was difficult to repair. At least with the current medical level, it was impossible to recover. If the nervous system was weak, even if one became an abyss, his strength would be greatly reduced. First of all, the reaction speed would be slower than other abyss beings. Secondly, the ability to resist pressure would be weak. For example, if the enemy was good at sound attacks and could make high-pitched sounds, it would be no less than a devil's voice entering the brain. Dean took a deep breath. He didn't dare to be careless. It was very difficult to kill the ice worm. He had to be careful. But the second difficulty was to endure the pain. It was obvious that the pain he would face was far beyond his imagination. He didn't know if he could withstand it. Although he had suffered a lot of injuries and thought that his ability to resist pain was quite strong, but at this moment, he was a little uncertain. However, this step would eventually come. It was unavoidable. Dean moved his body and asked Aisha to guard his body. He didn't want some small beast to rush over and ruin his plan. He took out the syringe and pierced it into the metal jar. He inhaled the full amount of the syringe. He took off his shirt and looked at the crack on his chest. This was the devil's nest. The skin of the devil's nest was like a broken black crack. When he got his first magic mark, the devil's nest was like a sharp sword. Now that he got the splitter, the devil's nest had changed more and more as his physique continued to evolve. Disinfection, measurement, temperature. After a series of basic procedures, Dean injected the silver mucus into the devil's nest. At the same time, he used his X-ray vision to pay close attention. He saw that the curled-up blade fur ball woke up the moment the silver mucus poured into the devil's nest. It retreated to the other side of the devil's nest. It looked vigilantly at the silver mucus. However, as the silver mucus continued to be injected, it gradually expanded to the entire devil's nest. The sharp blade fur ball seemed to be anxious as it rushed into the silver mucus. It was soon wrapped up by the silver mucus. Dean stopped after the silver mucus filled the devil's nest. He stared at the movement inside the devil's nest. He felt a tearing pain when the sharp blade fur ball rushed into the devil's nest. It was like a sharp blade scratching his skin. However, he could bear the pain. However, the feeling of pain soon expanded and became more and more sharp. At the same time, inside the demon nest, the sharp-bladed fur ball was covered in silver mucus. It was thrashing around violently, causing the skin on its surface to bulge. Sometimes this little thing's sharp blades would stab into the skin, and from the surface, it would appear as if something extremely sharp was protruding out of the skin. However, it ultimately did not break through, and the sharp blades would retract. A burst of pain spread from his chest to his whole body as the sharp blade fur ball violently struggled. Dean felt that his hands and feet were cold. His head was hot and cold. The pain gradually spread from all parts of his body. He felt like he was being grilled on a fire. Dean's face wrinkled as he clenched his fists in pain. At this moment, he suddenly understood why enduring the pain was the second most difficult part. Apart from simple pain, there were also all kinds of discomfort, intense dizziness, cramping pain, and numbness. At this moment, he even wanted to die or pass out. However, he didn't faint even though he was about to go crazy due to the stimulation of the pain. He felt that even if he fainted, he would wake up from the pain again. He even felt that he didn't want to become the abyss. Time slowly passed as many thoughts flashed through his mind, and the pain gradually subsided. Dean slowly woke up. He used his X-ray vision to look at his chest. He found that the silver mucus in the devil's nest was gone. The sharp blade fur ball was still curled up inside the devil's nest. However, there was a touch of silver on the surface of its body. Dean couldn't wait to use the devil's body. He saw that there were some silver spots on the surface of the devil's nest. It was cold to the touch. Dean tried to move for a moment. He found that his physique didn't improve much. It seemed that he hadn't reached the abyss. He was regretful, but he wasn't too disappointed. This was within his expectations. After all, the ice worm he had absorbed was less than 1/30th of its body. This meant that he had to endure the pain and various unbearable discomforts like before for another 30 times. His mouth twitched instinctively as he thought of this. Dean sat on the ground to rest. He wasn't in a hurry. The previous feeling was still fresh in his memory. He didn't want to try it again in a short period of time. He suddenly felt some admiration for the other abyssal walkers. Could it be that all of them had experienced such pain? What kind of strong willpower was this? While secretly admiring him, he also cheered himself on. After he cheered himself on, he looked at the silver slime in the metal can with a fierce expression. Suddenly, he felt that the world was so beautiful. Why should he enjoy the scenery around him? So he sat on the rock, admiring the frozen pool and the messy forest he had cut down. After half an hour, he grinned, picked up the syringe again, and went to the metal canister. It was a new round of injections. Pain, dizziness, nausea, cramps, and other sensations made Dean dizzy. His whole body was about to collapse. After these feelings gradually calmed down, he woke up again. He was secretly glad that he had persisted and didn't pass out. Although he desperately wanted to pass out during the absorption, he knew that once he passed out, even if he didn't have a nervous breakdown, there would be some defects. Dean continued to rest. This time he rested for more than 2 hours. He picked up a syringe again. He felt like a brave soldier who was stepping on the battlefield of certain defeat. After a scream, the third absorption ended. In the blink of an eye, another 2 days passed. Unpleasant curses sounded in the woods. After 10 minutes, it ended again. Dean sat on the rock and gasped for breath. 28 times. He looked at the silver mucus left in the metal can. He felt relieved that it would end after 3 or 4 more injections. As the absorption increased, his resistance to pain became stronger. He didn't know if he was numb to the pain or if his physical fitness had improved. Recalling the experience of the past 2 days and the pain of the first absorption, he suddenly felt a lot more relaxed. He secretly rejoiced that the bitterness he had suffered in Thornflower Prison was not in vain. If he hadn't experienced too much pain before, maybe he would have passed out or even completely collapsed after the first absorption. After all, he was too young compared to other Abyss Walkers. The age of the other Abyss Walkers was obvious. As they grew older, their sensory nerves became more resilient, and their resistance to pain was also stronger. Moreover, they had experienced more battles. The more battles they fought, the more injuries they suffered. Their resistance to pain was far stronger than ordinary people. If it were not for the torture in Thornflower Prison, he would probably have collapsed the first time he absorbed it. After all, he didn't have many battles. Most of the time, he was fighting with people inside the giant wall. In addition to being a scavenger and hunter in the early days of Consortium, he almost didn't fight in the middle period. He silently thanked the treatment in Thornflower Prison. There was a trace of nostalgia in his heart. He suddenly felt that life at that time wasn't as bad as he had imagined. It was just a little bitter. Thinking of this, he laughed at himself and shook his head. It was probably a long time ago that he couldn't remember clearly. People always felt that the pain of the past was nothing. The pain of the present was the most difficult. But every time he faced the pain of the present, he felt that it was the most painful time in his life. In the blink of an eye, from noon to night, Dean closed his eyes tightly, his forehead oozing fine cold sweat. This was the last time he absorbed, and it was also the quietest. He didn't scream, nor did he need to rely on cursing to relieve the pain. He just endured in silence, feeling that he could survive. After an unknown amount of time, his furrowed brows slowly relaxed. He slowly opened his eyes and looked at his hands. There were no changes. He then looked down at his chest. The black cracks on his skin seemed to have gotten bigger. However, these cracks were only in color. They were not real cracks on his skin. He used his X-ray vision to see that the silver mucus in the devil's nest had disappeared. The sharp blade furry ball had turned into a sea urchin-shaped ball, but it was slightly different compared to a sea urchin. It wasn't the first time that Dean had seen such a change in shape. As the number of absorption of the ice worm increased, the shape of the sharp blade furry ball also changed a little. He didn't feel that there was anything wrong with it. But if the sharp blade furry ball suddenly changed into this shape, then the difference would be very obvious. Is it over? There was a trace of doubt in Dean's eyes. The ice worm had finished absorbing, but there seemed to be no movement. In the past, he could feel the obvious burning sensation when his physique improved. But this time it seemed that he didn't feel anything. It was very dull. He didn't continue to watch. Instead, he jumped into the woods and tried to punch and kick. This time, Dean was shocked again. The change was too big. This feeling was similar to the last time when the basic values of his body had increased by 4 or 5 times. He could move more than 10 meters with a light movement. At the same time, Dean was excited. Hard work pays off. He succeeded. He couldn't wait to stimulate the power of the magic marks. The sword melted and covered his whole body. He entered the demonic body state. His demonic body had changed greatly when he was in different stages, such as Hunter and Limitless, Pioneer and Dominator. For example, when he was a Limitless, his demonic body was covered with white bones. But when he was a Pioneer, his whole body grew sharp blades. When he was a Dominator, the number of sharp blades increased, and many parts of the carapace had changed. Therefore, To verify whether he had broken through to the abyss or not, he would know by looking at the demonic body. When the demonic body was stimulated, Dean suddenly felt a heat flow through his body. This feeling was like his hands and feet were filled with abundant power. It was indescribably wonderful. But this wonderful feeling was soon replaced by shock and ecstasy. Chapter 888. Dean felt an unprecedented sense of power as the demonic body covered his body. He didn't even have time to look at his hands and feet as the pictures he wanted to see appeared in his sight. It was a very mysterious feeling. It was as if his consciousness was above his body and overlooking everything. He could see everything at a glance. At the same time, Dean immediately knew that his vision had further expanded. Through his omnidirectional vision, he could clearly see his appearance. This was a brand new body. Compared to before, there were some similarities, but there were also some differences. First, above the neck, it used to be covered in a black carapace, and his hair had solidified into sharp horns. But now, the black carapace on his cheeks protruded and turned into a black helmet. The curled armor was flexible and could withstand strong impacts. The solidified hair and horns also protruded longer, and at the center of these horns, there were a few short and thick horns that flashed with dark red light. Dean knew that the dark red light hidden in the horns was the sensing tissue that provided him with an omnidirectional vision. At first glance, he looked like a huge hairy monster, but the hairs on his body were sharp conical blades. The conical edges were concave and the sharp blades protruded outwards. It was a bit like the tri-edge bayonet that Dean had seen before. Just by looking at the shape, he knew that the conical blades were extremely sharp. If he bumped into them, then he would be crippled even if he didn't die. In addition to the sharp awl, the blade-like limbs on Dean's back had also changed a lot. The width and length had increased a lot, and the blades were bent as if they had joints. Dean tried to wave them twice, and they were abnormally flexible. "I've evolved." Dean was pleasantly surprised, but he couldn't help but feel unbelievable. He didn't feel much when he injected the worm's mucus, but after he stimulated the devil's body, there were earth-shaking changes. Compared to the devil's body, the splitter that he was proud of was a bit weak. It was like the difference between a short man and a strong man. His current demonic body was like a berserk armored tank. No one could stop him even if he was rampaging. The improvement of his physique and the changes in his demonic body told Dean that his body had evolved. Wasn't it the Abyss? Abyss! He was at the level of the giant wall's lord. He was a real big shot in this world. To be able to cross the Abyss without the protection of the giant wall, it was not restricted by the region. In Dean's mind, the Abyss was a symbol of freedom. He had always looked forward to becoming an Abyss walker, but he did not expect this day to come so soon. When he was absorbing the extreme ice worm, he was even worried that this extreme ice worm was not the extreme ice worm in the books, but something that looked extremely similar. Now, it seemed that his worries were unnecessary. Dean couldn't help but laugh as he felt the abundant power in his body. He hadn't been so happy for a long time. After laughing for a while, Dean looked at Aisha. His strange dark golden eyes stared at her. Although his eyes looked the same as a monster's, there was a clear gentleness in his eyes. "We're one step closer to our goal. Now I'm an Abyss walker. It's safer and faster to cross the Abyss. Maybe I'll be valued after going to the kingdom of God. I'll find a way to treat you soon." He didn't restrain himself. His eyes were full of longing. The pressure in his heart was reduced as his strength increased. He was just a dominator before. He had been looking for a way to go to the Abyss, but there was no clue or hope. He was depressed because he knew that the Abyss was just a threshold. It could only be regarded as a passing line for the big shots. If he wasn't even in the Abyss, then he wouldn't be able to mix up even if he went to the God's Kingdom. Not to mention getting in touch with the core secrets of the Monster Research Institute. The Monster Research Institute was spread all over the giant wall. The Emperor of the God's Kingdom must know about it, but he still indulged it. It wasn't difficult to imagine that all the experiments carried out by the Monster Research Institute were authorized by the royal family. In the olden era, the Demonic Creature Research Institute was equivalent to a place like the Chinese Academy of Sciences. The things inside were all related to national secrets. Even high-ranking officials might not be able to find out what was inside, let alone ordinary people. But now he was in the abyss. He was at the same level as the Lord of the Wall. He had a greater chance to mix into the core group of the God's kingdom. His face was full of smile. Soon he saw that his smile was a bit scary. Now he couldn't be described as a human. He could only be regarded as an upright monster. There was no resemblance to a human. His entire body was covered by the demonic aura. When he was a hunter and limitless hunter, only a part of his body was covered by the demonic aura. But now his entire body was covered. Although the demonic aura covered his entire body meant that his defense and strength had been expanded. But from the appearance, there was no trace of a human shadow. His eyes were dark gold. His pupils were the size of a thumb. But with his current height, it didn't seem to protrude. There was a black horn on the bridge of his nose. His ears were covered with a black cuticle. Only a small ear hole could be seen. Dean raised his hand and touched it. His fingers were like sharp blades. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they were claws. Moreover, the 5 sharp fingers were extremely long. They were like an arm. In addition to the physical changes, Dean also found that his field of vision not only became omnidirectional, but he could also see the fine dust in the air, as well as some bubbles. These bubbles were almost transparent, rolling left and right. The traces of rolling were caused by the wind, which also meant that he could see the flow of the wind. Dean was curious about the different abilities brought by the new demonic aura. He tried to test it. From the physical changes to the changes in the organs of the body, he found that his hearing and smell had increased by several times. In addition, he could hear the sound of 2 strange insects whispering to each other. The 2 insects were quietly lying on the leaves. There was no movement. No one knew that they were whispering to each other. However, Dean didn't understand the insect language, so he couldn't understand what they were saying. Dean thought that it was a useless ability. But soon, he had a sudden idea. Although he couldn't understand the content of the insect language, but he could get some information through the changes in the rhythm of the insect language. For example, when he patted the leaves, the insects would be startled and make strange sounds. It was more harsh. It could be regarded as their language when they were startled. In the wilderness, it could be used as an early warning or reconnaissance method. Dean still felt that it was better to change to a stronger combat ability. But since he had such an ability, he couldn't change it. He could only think of ways to make better use of it. The X-ray ability is still there. I can capture heat and night vision. Dean found that although the changes in the demonic aura were great, there weren't many new abilities. He didn't know whether he didn't find the right environment or method to stimulate the new abilities, or the new abilities were attached to the attack. For example, the hardness of the sharp awl on his body was strengthened, or the sharpness was improved. After thinking about it, Dean felt that it would be better to test his abilities on the monsters he met along the way. There were all kinds of monsters, so it was convenient for him to test the changes in his abilities. Dean immediately thought of Lozic. It wasn't that he had feelings for Lozic, but he was thinking about the conversation he had with the other people last night. The banquet was related to the Abyss and the Ice Worm. Although he didn't know whether those people deliberately released the news, but it seemed that he wouldn't lose anything. After all, he was also an Abyss. Although there were 3 Abyss monsters in the giant wall, but he felt that they wouldn't attack him at the same time. If he met one of them alone, then they wouldn't fight him because they knew his identity. Chapter 889. After packing up the backpack and metal cans, Dean took Aisha back to King City. With the golden ticket given by Razik, it didn't take much effort to enter the city. After secretly handing over the golden ticket, they smoothly passed the interrogation. They didn't even need to show their ID. Dean had been away for almost a week. He didn't know whether the banquet had started or not. But when he entered the city with Razik, he heard him mention that the banquet would take a long time, and they could wait for the devil mark to be approved. So, the banquet shouldn't have started yet. Dean called a carriage on the roadside. Dean told the coachman the location, and the coachman immediately drove the carriage to the hotel. After more than an hour, the carriage arrived. Dean glanced at the streets along the way. He found that the king's city was really big and prosperous. It was even better than Sylvia's king's city. As they approached the hotel, Dean glanced around and was relieved. Razik and the others were there. It seemed that the banquet hadn't started yet. Dean got off the carriage, handed over the golden ticket, and pulled Aisha to the hotel. The coachman was stunned as he looked at the golden ticket in his hand. The money was enough for him to pull the carriage for half a year. He was about to tell Dean that he couldn't afford it, but he saw Dean's back was already far away. He looked up and suddenly came to his senses. The words that rushed to his mouth also stopped. He pretended to be stupid for a while. Seeing that Dean didn't turn back to ask for money, he immediately drove the carriage away. Not long after Dean entered the hotel, Razik and two others rushed over. They saw Dean drinking tea in the lounge next to the hotel lobby. They were stunned for a moment, and then quickly went to Dean and said, "Mr. Dean, where have you been these days?" Dean glanced at him. He knew that the two pioneers behind Razik hadn't noticed him, so they informed him to come over. He said, "It's a private matter. I don't need to tell you, right?" A trace of embarrassment flashed across Lozik's face, but he quickly put on a smile and said, "Of course, I was presumptuous. It's just that there are all kinds of people in the capital. It's better for Mr. Dean to inform me in advance where you are going in the future. If C and I did not see you leave, I would have thought that Mr. Dean had disappeared." How could Dean not know his thoughts? He was worried that he would find another lord and cause trouble for him. He waved his hand. "Don't make a fuss. I'm a grown man. I don't think anyone would dare to abduct me. Anyway, the banquet has started. Why are you still here?" "Mr. Dew, you must be joking." Lozik smiled bitterly and said, "There are many lords invited this time, and some of them are far away, so there is more time for the banquet. It will be held in 2 days. Fortunately, Mr. Dean, you came back in time. Otherwise, it would be a great pity to miss this banquet. It's just a banquet. What's there to regret?" Dean said indifferently. Lozik's eyes turned and looked around. Seeing that no one was paying attention to them, he immediately pulled a chair next to him and sat down. He lowered his voice and said, "Mr. Dean, it is said that this banquet is related to the Abyss and the Ice Worm. The Rose family who held the banquet seemed to have been instructed by an Abyss lord to go outside the giant wall to look for the Ice Worm." He looked at Dean. From Dean's previous attitude and questions, Lozik estimated Dean's strength. He was a dominator. For this kind of strong people, the most desired thing was the Ice Worm. Dean knew that Lozik already knew his strength and identity. But at this moment, he had become an Abyss lord. Although he was still interested in the Ice Worm, it was not as necessary as before. However, he had to put on a show. His eyes lit up and showed a bit of excitement. He asked, "Looking for the Ice Worm outside the giant wall? Is this the purpose of this banquet?" "Most likely." Lozik quickly replied. If he could send Dean away, then he would immediately apply to cancel the application for the supplicant's magic marks. Although he would have to pay 1/3 of the cost, and the temple would have to take a heavy line in the credit column, but at least he would be able to recover 2/3 of his wealth. He wouldn't go bankrupt. Dean looked at Lozik and pondered for a little. "Let's wait for the banquet to start. Although I don't know where you got the news from, but it's just news after all." Lozik nodded and didn't say much. He got up and said, "Mr. Dean, since you are back, I won't bother you anymore. You can tell me if there's anything you want to say. I don't want to miss the banquet." Dudian nodded, picked up the tea, and drank. Lozik was very tactful. He turned around and left. The two guards behind him secretly glanced at Dean. Although Lozik claimed that Dean was just a guard of his house, the two guards who had been trained by Lozik for many years knew Dean's true identity. They also knew that another of their companions had died in the hands of the youth in front of them. "Ice worms, search outside the giant wall." Dean didn't pay attention to the surrounding eyes. He was immersed in his thoughts as he looked at the scenery outside the hotel. He felt that this banquet was a trap. Otherwise, the content of the banquet wouldn't have spread out so quickly. Even Lozik knew about it. Most of the other lords were aware of it. Even the other lords who weren't invited received the news. This kind of information that flowed in the dark sometimes spread faster and more widely than the news that was publicized. However, Dean didn't think that there was a conspiracy. Could this banquet turn into a Hongmin banquet? He didn't believe that so many lords would be killed in the capital city. If that was the case, the territories controlled by these lords would be in chaos. The capital city certainly didn't want to see such a situation, unless the person in charge of the capital city was a cruel and muddle-headed wall lord. Dean carefully thought about it and felt that it wasn't impossible. After all, the strength of the Abyss didn't mean that the moral character, content, cultivation, and other aspects would reach the Abyss. There were many strange people in this world. They had made records in their professional fields, but their moral character and knowledge were a mess. Even some people who specialized in knowledge and literature were the same. Scholars who could write praises of life didn't necessarily have great reverence for life. Perhaps they just had the ability to outline this reverence. He had seen too many examples in Sylvia. When they usurped the royal family, they used those famous people to create momentum. Many so-called upright and outspoken masters, so-called ascetic scholars, all succumbed to money and authority. The so-called upright and plain-spoken was perhaps just a selling point of their profits. Chapter 890. 2 days passed quickly. Dean took Aisha to eat, drink, and play around in the capital. They enjoyed the rare, peaceful time. The banquet began in the blink of an eye. Dean and Lozic sat in the same carriage. They followed the carriages of the other lords to the venue of the banquet, Rose Manor. Rose Manor has a history of more than 100 years. The street where it is located was renamed Rose Street 60 years ago. The current Grand Duke of Rose built Violet Square. It has become one of the 4 most prosperous areas in the capital. People will think of Rose Manor and Grand Duke Rose whenever Violet Square is mentioned. They are hereditary nobles that have been passed down from their ancestors to the present. Inside the carriage, Lozic was talking about Rose Manor to Dean. Dean casually asked a question. He didn't interrupt Lozic as he listened to the story. It didn't take long for the convoy to enter a bustling area. Lozic lifted the curtain and looked out. There was a trace of awe and yearning in his eyes. He sighed. "We are arriving at Violet Square. It is worthy of being one of the 4 most prosperous areas in the capital." Dean felt the prosperity of the capital. The streets were crowded. Although there were many lords' flags, but it was still difficult to move. There were several teams of knights who came to maintain order. Lozic whispered as he looked at the team of knights. "They're the squires of Grand Duke Rose." Dean glanced at the knight and remembered the emblem on his shoulder. It was in the shape of a rose. It matched the title of the lord. After half an hour, the convoy finally arrived in front of an empty street. There weren't many people on this street. Most of the passers-by would take a detour when they got close to this place. Most of them looked at this place with awe in their eyes. Dean lifted the curtain and immediately understood the difference between the Rose Lord and the other lords. The manor in front of their convoy was vast and boundless, like a green grassland. More than a dozen maids and gardeners could be seen in the manor. They were trimming tea trees and lawns. More than a dozen buildings could be seen in the distance. If it was an ordinary person, they could barely see the black outline of the buildings. The size of the manor was astonishing. It was even more exaggerated than the palaces that Dean had seen. Establishing such a large manor territory in the king's city, Dean's eyes flashed. He had a more intuitive understanding of the strength of Rose Manor. At this moment, 7 or 8 squads of knights galloped in from outside the manor. Their armor shone brightly, and the feathers on their helmets were incomparably bright red. Each of them stood erect and looked extremely majestic. These knights arrived in front of the caravan and communicated with the guards at the gate for a while. Then, they opened the gate of the manor. The first caravan drove in first, and the other caravans followed one after another, slowly driving into the vast manor. After entering the manor, it was as if they had entered another world. The bustling noises from before had completely disappeared, and the place had become extremely quiet and peaceful. Lozic smacked his lips and lifted the curtain to look around. Although he was a feudal lord, he rarely had the chance to be a guest in Grand Duchess Rose's manor. At this moment, compared to Rose Manor, he thought of his own castle and manor that he was so proud of, and he suddenly felt a sense of shame. Not only Lozic, But the other lords in the caravan were also the same. They had seen the majestic atmosphere of Rose Manor, and also the majestic financial resources. Dean wasn't interested in these things. He had seen too much gold and silver wealth when he had usurped the Wall Lord position. Although Rose Manor was quite grand, but in his opinion, it was just like that. Moreover, he regarded himself as a fighter and believed in the iron law of respect. He didn't care about these superficial things. However, he also understood that these fancy things weren't simple beauty and atmosphere, but an invisible show of force. 10 minutes later, the caravan passed through the manor and arrived at the top of the hillside. As soon as they arrived, they saw a majestic, ancient castle located everywhere on the hillside. Among them, in front of the building with the highest floor and the largest area, stood a line of knights, decorating the courtyard of the building with a jubilant atmosphere. The caravan arrived in front of the main hall. Everyone got off one after another. That is the third son of Grand Duchess Rose, Crody. Razik whispered to Dean as he looked at a youth in a blue shirt. Dean glanced at him and nodded. He didn't say anything. Razik knew what Dean really cared about, but he didn't say much. The reason why he introduced Dean to Dean was that he was afraid that Dean would cause trouble. Although he was eager for Dean to have an accident, but after all, Dean was following him. If there was an accident, then it was inevitable that Dean would be implicated. Luo Sieur, come here. Razik waved to the two women who got off the caravan. Accompanied by the guards, the two women walked over. Luo Sini glanced at Dean, who was standing next to Razik. There was a trace of dissatisfaction in her eyes, but she didn't show it. Although she liked to draw and play the piano and didn't know much about territorial wars, she wasn't completely ignorant. At least in terms of etiquette, she knew how to restrain herself, especially in front of someone who was in awe of her father. Luo Yu was the elder sister. She looked at Dean with a smile and said to Razik, Dad, there are so many lords today. When should we go in? Now. Razik looked around and said to Dean, Mr. Dean, come with me. Otherwise the guards will have to stay outside. Duddy nodded. As the group walked toward the main hall, Crody waited for Razik at the door and said warmly, I've long heard of Lord Razik's great name, and now that I've seen you in person, I can't help but admire your extraordinary bearing. These two must be your daughters. They are so beautiful and elegant. Razik was overwhelmed by the favor and said, Thank you. Thank you. I made a fool of myself. Crody smiled as he glanced at Dean and Aisha. Who are these two? Razik replied, They're the children of my relatives. We came to see them. It won't delay anything. Crody frowned slightly, thought for a moment, and said, All right, you go ahead. Razik was relieved to see Dean agree. He led Dean into the main hall. When they entered the hall, even Luo Ya and Luo and I, who were born in aristocratic families, couldn't help but gasp. They couldn't help but look shocked. It was simply too gorgeous. Everything they saw was golden and majestic. The entire main hall was extremely spacious and could probably accommodate thousands of people. It was like a small square with more than a dozen large tables of different sizes. On the tables were piles of champagne and a large number of plates. There was also a row of chefs who specialized in serving food and maids who shuttled through the banquet. Crystal lamps were hanging above their heads. They were arranged in an orderly manner. The two women held their breath as they looked at the exquisite atmosphere. Dean saw this scene and suddenly thought of the villages that he met at the outermost edge of the giant wall. Dilapidated and muddy and starving villagers. He sighed in his heart. He didn't sympathize with those people as there was no need. But there was a touch of regret. He couldn't tell why he was regretful. Perhaps he hated this polarizing phenomenon, but he was powerless to change it. Or perhaps he had seen through it and agreed with it. He had become a part of it. Suddenly a voice sounded from behind Dean as he was lost in his thoughts. Get out of the way. The voice was rough and full of majesty. Dean turned around and saw that Razik and his two daughters had already entered the banquet hall. Only he and Aisha were standing at the door. Chapter 891. Dean suddenly remembered that many years ago, when he was still a scavenger, he attended a low-level aristocratic banquet held by the Melon Consortium. He was also scolded when he entered the door. Although he was full of anger at that time, he could only swallow his anger and retreat to the side. He didn't expect to encounter the same scene again after so many years. The difference was that he wasn't the scavenger who could be bullied by others. However, the same thing was that he had changed, but the world hadn't changed. Which family are you from? The one who spoke was a middle-aged man with a tall stature. He was dressed in elegant clothes. He had a square face and thick eyebrows which gave him a bit of majesty. Seeing that Dean didn't respond, he slightly frowned and spoke again. Dean calmly looked at him. He didn't say anything, nor did he want to kill. He just held Aisha's small hand and turned to walk into the main hall. You? The middle-aged man was sullen. He didn't expect to be ignored by a junior. He wanted to scold a few words, but Dean had already turned to leave. If he reprimanded again, he would inevitably have to raise his voice, which would be somewhat rude. He coldly snorted. Some people nowadays are getting worse and worse. They don't respect their elders. What Vero said is right. The younger generation is getting more and more rude. Lord, don't be angry with these juniors. It's not worth it. Someone next to him persuaded. Good. Let's enter. The banquet is about to start. Several people immediately changed the topic to break the awkward atmosphere. Vero's cold face eased a bit, but in his heart he secretly remembered Dean's face. He had embarrassed him in public. After he inquired about Dean's identity, he would inevitably give him some color to see. It would be best if Dean's parents would personally send him to the door to apologize. Thinking of this, his expression quickly returned to normal. He lightly smiled. Everyone, please come in. I don't know if Rose Lord is present. This main hall is really big. It's worthy of being the home of Rose Lord. Someone next to him exclaimed. They entered together and were quickly attracted by the splendor of the main hall, as if nothing had happened. After entering the main hall, he picked up the champagne from the table and drank 2 mouthfuls. The taste was very good. Then he took some delicate snacks and went to the rest area to sit down. There were a few sofas around a table, just like a teapot surrounded by a few small tea tables. There were only 7 or 8 people sitting in the rest area. All of them seemed to be young people brought by their parents to play. On the other hand, their fathers were busy making friends at the banquet. This kind of aristocratic banquet was a place to socialize. It could expand one's social network and increase one's reputation. For aristocrats, other than resources, the most important thing was their reputation. If they were invited, they could at least say that they attended the banquet hosted by Rose Overlord. This would indirectly tell others that they had a close relationship with Rose Overlord. If anyone wanted to take advantage of them, they would have to think twice about the Rose Overlord behind them. Dean took the snacks and found an empty table to eat. While eating, he looked at the groups of aristocratic lords in the magnificent hall. His peripheral vision lingered on one of them, but he quickly moved away and continued to eat his snacks in boredom. Hey, hello. Is it convenient for me to sit here? A handsome voice came from his side. Dean glanced up and saw a blond youth in his early 20s. He was very young and had a sunny smile. It's not convenient. Dean retracted his gaze and faintly refused. The youth choked and was slightly stunned. He didn't expect such an answer from Dean. Most people would at least find a reason even if they didn't want to sit here. For example, someone would come here and so on. But Dean seemed to be too lazy to even find a reason. The corner of the youth's mouth slightly twitched, but he was still very self-restrained. He smiled and said, "This seat is empty. I'll sit and go." Then he pulled out a chair and sat down. His eyes quickly turned to Aisha. Although Aisha was wearing a veil, but the thin veil couldn't hide the outline of her cheeks. At first glance, it was obvious that she was a very beautiful woman. Moreover, this kind of hazy feeling made people curious and want to explore. "Is this your female companion?" The youth glanced at her and turned to ask Dean. There was a trace of expectation in his eyes. He hoped that Dean would answer no. If it was just a sister, then he might have some hope. When Dean heard the youth's words, the dull expression on his face suddenly converged, leaving only coldness. "Get lost." The youth was dumbfounded. He looked at Dean as if he had seen a ghost. He was just asking. Even if it was your female companion, you shouldn't be so angry, right? The kind smile on his face quickly disappeared. He frowned. "I was just asking. If I offended you, You can tell me. There's no need. I said get lost. Dean turned his head and looked straight at him. The youth was so angry that his face turned red. Anger rushed from his chest to his head. But when he was stared at by Dean, he suddenly felt a chill. His pores tightened. He couldn't tell what this feeling was, but he felt fear in his heart. A very real fear. His face changed for a moment. He gritted his teeth and said, "Which lord's family are you from? Get lost." Dean didn't even bother to look at him again. The youth clenched his fists and stared at Dean fiercely. He turned and left. Even if Dean didn't say, he could find out. After all, it wasn't a difficult matter. The people at the other tables had already noticed the commotion here. Seeing the young man leave with his tail between his legs, they immediately whispered to each other. From the whispers of these people, Dean also knew the identity of the young man. He was the youngest son of a famous noble lord. He listened to a few words, but was too lazy to listen anymore. These people were not on the same level as him. If it was not troublesome, he could easily solve it, so there was no need to care about it. Dean sat for about half an hour. The door of the main hall slowly closed, and the banquet officially began. At this time, Dean saw the famous Rose Lord. She was a woman in her early 30s. Her temperament was elegant and noble. She had a bit of coldness and charm. It was easy for people to have a primitive desire to conquer her. There were 2 guards next to the Rose Lord. They wore low-key armor, but the heat fluctuations in their bodies weren't covered. They were all dominators. Dean's eyes slightly narrowed. At the same time, he noticed that the 2 guards also glanced at him. After seeing Dean's appearance, they turned their eyes away and didn't pay any attention to him. Dean knew why they looked over. In the main hall, the noble lords only brought their daughters and family members. They didn't bring any guards, let alone bring weapons. This was a banquet, not a meeting hall. If anyone brought guards in, they would not give face to the Rose Lord. However, there were still 3 or 4 lords who brought guards. These guards were all pioneers. They were not conspicuous in the crowd, but looking through the heat source, they could be seen at a glance. In the eyes of the 2 dominators, Dean was obviously a guard brought in by a noble. After a series of polite greetings, the Rose Lord continued to talk about several things. However, it had nothing to do with the ice worm and the abyss. It was about the construction of the king's city and the construction of the new city. The construction of a new city required the efforts of many noble lords. After the new city was built, the nobles who contributed could have the priority to choose the most prosperous area in the city. Once they occupied a good area, they could open a shop and bring endless wealth to the nobles. Dean listened to the Rose Lord talking about the construction of the new city in detail. It seemed that she didn't want to mention anything else. He couldn't help but frown. Could it be that the rumors that Razik heard before were just rumors? His eyes flashed. He sat quietly and ate his snacks. He didn't leave on the spot. Since he was here, he was not in a hurry to leave. The atmosphere of the banquet was very harmonious with the melodious music and the songs of the invited poets. In the blink of an eye, it was evening. Razik suddenly came to Dean and whispered, "Mr. Dean, do you want to participate in the matter of the ice worm?" Dean raised his eyebrows. "How can I participate?" Razik looked at Dean's expression and knew what he meant. He whispered, "If you want to participate, I can ask for a place from the Rose Lord. The construction of the new city is to select the participants." She didn't say it clearly, but the meaning of the Rose Lord is very clear. If you don't have spare money and resources, you can leave. You see, many lords have withdrawn from the banquet. Now the ones who are staying are those who want to participate. Dean looked up at him and saw that he didn't seem to be lying. He looked at the Rose Lord who was chatting with several noble lords in the distance. He thought for a moment and said, "Okay, but I want to hear the specifics." Razik was relieved in his heart, but on the surface he said, "That's natural. Since Mr. Dean has agreed, then when the banquet is about to end, the Rose Lord will talk about this matter openly. Mr. Dean will know what is going on at that time. I don't know now, but I got news from other sources. If you want to participate, then maybe you have to send people who are above the pioneer level to be eligible to participate. So if Mr. Dean wants to participate, I hope he can participate on behalf of me." Dean knew what Razik was thinking. He said, You don't have to worry about this. If things are similar to what I think, then I won't go back on my words. Razik looked at him, nodded, and turned away. He once again mixed into the crowd to talk with people. Chapter 892. Everyone be quiet. Miss Ikari has something to say. A middle-aged butler dressed in a tuxedo appeared at the end of the banquet. The eyes of the audience were focused on him. The people who were chatting in small circles immediately stopped talking. They knew that the main event had begun. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the Rose Lord, who looked to be in her early 30s, smiled and said, "Regarding the construction of a new city, the lords who are interested can come in 3 days to discuss in detail. Today, we are here to talk about another matter. Speaking of which, we are also entrusted by Mr. Holani to pass on a message." Although everyone had already heard the news, they couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. There were many people named Horny, but there was only one who could be addressed respectfully by the Rose Lord. That was Horny, one of the 3 strongest people in the Abyss. He was also the founder of the Ryan Chamber of Commerce. At this moment, when she said this name, everyone knew that the news they had heard before was not groundless. For a time, many people had thoughts in their hearts, and their eyes flashed. Mr. Harani's Ghost Shadow Hunting Group has recently found traces of ice worms at the edge of the swamp area of the Devil's Pit outside the Giant Wall. I don't need to introduce the ice worms to everyone. This time, the Rose family is representing Mr. Harani to pass on a message. At present, Mr. Harani is preparing a 10,000-man hunting team to explore the Devil's Pit and look for ice worms. Hikari's eyes scanned the audience. There was an elegant smile on her face. She knew that the prestige of her family would rise after the banquet. After all, to be able to establish a friendship with an Abyss powerhouse was enough to make the other families who were coveting them scared. Dean also guessed the identity of Horny when he heard this. It seemed that the previous gossip that Lozic and others had heard was intentionally spread by Rose Lord. Lords who are willing to participate will not only have the opportunity to gain Mr. Horny's friendship, but also get rewards from Mr. Horny. Of course, you'll also get the friendship and cooperation of a Rose family. Hikari saw that many lords were moved. She smiled in her heart. It was a rare opportunity to work for the Abyss powerhouses. Moreover, these families would remember their kindness. Although she was a Grand Duke and her status was higher than 99% of the people present, but the lords who stayed until now weren't small characters. The economic and trade cooperation would bring her huge benefits. "Miss Hikari, can we send people?" Someone immediately asked. Others looked at Hikari with a trace of passion in their eyes. "Lords who wish to participate, you only need to send a hunter of the 10,000 Slayer level to participate immediately." Hikari smiled lightly. Of course, the more hunters that participate, the more benefits we will get after the mission is completed. This time, our Rose family is prepared to send 2 Dominators, 5 Demon Generals, and 10,000 man-killing experts to help Mr. Horny obtain the extreme ice worm. There was a commotion in the crowd. Although he knew that the Rose clan was very strong, he did not expect that they would send so many people to participate. Just the 2 rulers alone were invaluable, and they were also the foundation of the Rose clans, standing among the great clans. It should be known that a lord like Loxic, even if he emptied his entire family, could only cultivate 1 demon general. However, the Rose clan had sent 5 demon generals and 2 rulers, not to mention 100 experts who could kill 10,000 people. Once they lost this kind of manpower, it could be said that the Rose clan would suffer a devastating blow. Perhaps they would instantly fall from being a great clan in the capital to a small or medium-sized lord like Loxic. Moreover, once the Rose family was weak, their industries would be a big fat piece of meat. Competitors who had been coveting for a long time were likely to take the opportunity to swallow them. At that time, it was unknown whether the Rose family's flag would continue to fly in the wind. "Miss Hikari, what if the search fails?" Someone asked worriedly. Hikari glanced at the person who spoke and smiled. "This time, Mr. Horny will personally lead the team. There is basically no possibility of failure. Even if it fails, Mr. Horny will give the corresponding compensation. At the same time, we will get Mr. Horny's protection. If it succeeds, the benefits will be even greater. I don't think I need to say more. Everyone knows the stakes. As soon as these words fell, everyone looked at each other. The lords present were all aristocrats in charge of a region. Unlike the hereditary aristocrats in ordinary dynasties, here, the aristocrats competed with each other for resources. Few of the lords who could become lords were hedonistic children. Everyone thought about it for a bit and knew how great the benefits were. If it failed, the people they sent would be lost. It would be a blow to the family, but they could get the protection of Mr. Horny. It could only be said that it was a gain. If it was successful, then Horny would get the ice worm. His strength would go a step further, and he would be able to dominate the other two Abyss forces. He might even be on an equal footing with the Wall Lords. In this way, they could naturally be listed as part of Horny's faction. They would be able to trade with each other and resist the enemy together. There were too many benefits. No matter how they looked at it, it was a profitable business. Just as everyone was getting excited, a voice rang out. Miss Ikari, the Ghostly Shadow Hunting Group, and the Ghost Knife Man Battle Group under Mr. Horny are full of talents. Why do you want us to participate? Ikari glanced at this person and said, Good question. The reason is very simple. Mr. Horny's two major corps are restricted by the Wall Lord and cannot be fully used. Secondly, if Mr. Horny can get the extreme ice worm this time, his strength will go further. At that time, he will naturally expand his business circle. This time, letting everyone participate is also giving everyone chance. Those who participate will become part of Mr. Horny's business circle in the future. I won't mention the benefits. Everyone can consider it. Many people whispered as they heard the words. Dean was thoughtful. Could the ice worm make the abyss a step further? In other words, the abyss wasn't the end. There were stronger existences above it. The ice worm was similar to the existence of God's marrow. It could enhance the strength of the abyss. It seemed like it was better to have more of these things. He was more determined to participate as he thought of this. He could go to the kingdom of God at any time, but the ice worm was extremely rare. If he didn't get one from Amelie tribe, then he wouldn't be able to become an abyss. He thought about the giant wall of Sylvia for hundreds of years, but there was only one abyss. Moreover, Aristotle's daughter was just a master. In fact, the evolution system was no different from talent. Talent could only be used in combat. Life itself needed nutrients. Even if it was a disabled or mentally retarded child, as long as they had magic marks in God's marrow, they could become a pioneer. However, even Aristotle couldn't make his daughter become the second abyss in the giant wall. It could be seen how difficult it was to deal with the ice worm. Aristotle would leave the giant wall for 5 years or 10 years. Didn't he want his daughter to become an abyss? Would she be able to suppress the other forces within the giant wall after he left? Unfortunately, he didn't have the ice worm. Even if he went to the kingdom of God, he wouldn't be able to get it. It showed how rare this thing was. But thinking about it, an extreme ice worm could create an abyssal demon. Even if you had mountains of gold, you might not be able to buy it. Miss Hikari, the Leroy family is willing to participate. I will send 2 demon generals and 10,000 executioners to assist Mr. Holland. After a while, someone in the crowd shouted. Everyone looked at the person who spoke. They were secretly speechless. 2 demon generals. It was a big deal. After someone took the lead, the others also expressed their views. Lozic slowly moved to Dean's side. Mr. Dean, should we participate? Chapter 893. Lozic didn't think that Dean would take this into consideration. He pondered for a little and whispered, I have some guesses. Although Mr. Horny is an Abyss Lord, but he has a poor relationship with another Abyss Lord. He is relying on the Wall Lord as a mediator. It seems that he doesn't want to lose too many of his guards. Dean's eyes flashed as he nodded slightly. Although Lozic's statement was a bit strange, but he could understand it. There was no room for 2 tigers in the same mountain. If there was a conflict between 2 Abyss Lords, then they couldn't do everything by themselves. At this time, they had to rely on their subordinates. If their subordinates were too weak, then they would lose face. If he invited Loxic and the other lords to participate, the sacrifice would not affect Horny. As for protection, it was just a matter of a word for him. With a single sentence, he could make countless lords willingly work for him. This was his influence, and it was also a very profitable deal. Moreover, since the banquet was held, it meant that the news about the ice worm couldn't be concealed. So Horny didn't deliberately hide it and secretly worked alone. Dudian said, "Then let's participate. How many people are you going to send?" There was a trace of embarrassment on Lozic's face. "Mr. Dean is joking. You know that I'm just a small lord. If Mr. Dean didn't want to participate, then I would have quit." Dean understood the meaning of Lozic's words. "You have a lot of courage. You want me to work for you, and then you can sell Horny a good deal. Isn't this a good deal enough to compensate for the losses of a supplicant?" Lozic hurriedly said, "Mr. Dean, I didn't mean that. If you don't want to—" Dean waved his hand to interrupt him. "Of course I will participate. If you weren't a little useful, then you would have lost your life." Dean's words were very straightforward. In fact, he didn't need to modify his words. Lozic's face turned pale, but he was relieved as he thought of Dean's terrifying strength. "Thank you, Mr. Dean. I will urge the temple to get you the magic marks as soon as possible." Dean waved his hand as he didn't want to talk anymore. Lozic saw that Dean wasn't angry, so he slowly retreated and mixed into the crowd. He waited for the others to sign up, and then he also signed up. This was the most stingy of all the lords. But many people recognized Lozic. They didn't say anything as they saw that he had the courage to participate. They just sneered in their hearts. After a moment, everyone participated. Those who were just going to wait and see chose to give up and consciously withdrew from the banquet. There was a trace of satisfaction on Hikari's face as he listened to the butler's report. "Lord Horny will leave the day after tomorrow. Please be sure to gather your men tomorrow. The exploration outside the giant wall is not a trivial matter. I hope that you can send your best elites. If you can get Horny's recognition or help him, then you may be able to get Horny recommendation in the future. There are many benefits. You shouldn't miss such a great opportunity." Everyone smiled in response, but in their hearts they were thinking, send the most elite men? What kind of place was this swamp magic pit? Although everyone hadn't left the giant wall, they had long heard about it. Even if they stepped into the abyss, they might encounter danger. This was the reason why some people chose to give up. If Horny also fell in the abyss, then the investment would obviously be a loss to his grandmother's house. Although the abyss was strong, but it wasn't invincible. Moreover, it was a place like the swamp. After Hikari finished talking about the exploration outside the giant wall, the banquet officially came to an end. Hikari invited all the people who participated to stay in the Rose Manor. As for those who withdrew, they went back to their homes to find their mothers. Dean and Lozic left together with other lords to stay in the Rose Manor. Most of the lords stayed because they wanted to take the opportunity to make friends with Grand Duke Rose. At the same time, they wanted to visit the Rose Manor, or they wanted to meet some big shots here. In any case, many lords chose to stay. Dean returned to the room arranged by the butler assistant of the Rose Manor. He used his X-ray vision to observe the entire Rose Manor. It was a large area with many servants. Knights and squires were scattered around the manor like stars. Most of these knights and squires were hunters. There were several teams of about 100 people. All of them were limiters. There were more than 30 pioneers who were distributed around the manor. These people were obviously not all the forces of the Rose family. After all, the Rose Manor was only located in the King's City. There wouldn't be too many troops stationed here. Their real private territory was where their base camp was. Even so, the number of masters here was enough to kill Lozic hundreds of times. Dean also saw 7 or 8 internal desolate level masters and 3 dominators among the pioneers. The Rose family had sent 2 dominators to lead the exploration. There was still one left. Moreover, there was likely to be another dominator in their private territory. From this point, it could be seen that the Rose family was one of the top few lords. In the past, Dean would have felt pressure, but now he didn't feel anything when he sensed the 3 dominators. Ever since he broke through to the abyss, his perception of the dominators had become very weak. Although he hadn't fought with other dominators, the power brought by the evolution had made him ignore the ordinary dominators. in his senses, not to mention 3 dominators. Even if there was a 0 behind them, he might not be able to take it seriously. This didn't mean that he could easily defeat the joint attack of 30 dominators. If these dominators were all attack, perception, or defense types, he was sure that he could defeat them head-on. But if some of them were good at ambushes, sneak attacks, or poison, then even if he was in the abyss, he wouldn't be able to bear the consequences. The reason why he didn't care was that if there were 30 dominators, although he might not be able to fight them head-on, they might not be able to stop him if he wanted to leave. After figuring out the strength of the Rose Manor, Dean hugged Aisha to sleep. The next day, Dean took Aisha out of the Rose Manor. When he went out, he met Lozic. He greeted him and went shopping. Lozic smiled wryly when he saw Dean so leisurely. He only told him to come back early. Chapter 894. Lord Vero. All the jewelry here is made by Master Dylan. Look at the quality of the gems. In a luxurious and resplendent shop by the street, a few people of extraordinary bearing were casually inspecting the jewelry inside. The light of the gems was reflected by the mirrors on the wall, dazzling the eyes. Vero looked around casually. Although the jewelry here was claimed to be made by Master Dylan, how many of them were actually made by him? But even a single piece was enough to attract the attention of many rich people. As the few people looked around, they did not notice a handsome man and beautiful woman slowly walking past them. Asterisk whoosh. Asterisk the sound of something cutting through the air rang out. The expression of a burly young man standing beside Vero suddenly changed. He quickly turned around and raised his hand, only to feel a chill in his crotch. It was as if a gust of wind had brushed past him. His face turned even paler, but soon he heard a scream behind him. He quickly turned around and saw that Lord Vero, who had been choosing a crystal pendant by the counter, had fallen to the ground and was moaning in pain. Assassin. The burly young man's heart went cold. This place was very close to the Rose Manor. Who would dare ambush him here? He did not care so much and quickly activated his demon body, turning into a humanoid lizard monster in the blink of an eye. He stood on the spot, a long, pointed lizard head sticking out its tongue. Although the outline of his face was human, it did not give off a familiar feeling. Instead, it was even more frightening. A woman's scream rang out in the jewelry shop. Everyone quickly distanced themselves from the burly young man, some even turning around and running out of the shop. The guards outside the shop heard the commotion and hurried over. The scene immediately became chaotic. The people outside the street heard the commotion inside and were afraid of getting into trouble, so they quickly stepped aside and retreated to the side of the road. The burly young man narrowed his eyes. Ignoring the disdainful and frightened gazes around him, he quickly scanned the crowd, looking for the assassin who had ambushed him. Just then, the guards of the shop arrived, as did the experts behind the shop. They came to Vero's side and saw that his right knee was bleeding profusely. One of them quickly helped him stop the bleeding and examine the injury. Soon, a copper coin was found in Vero's knee. It was this copper coin that had pierced through Vero's knee and was embedded inside. Seeing that there was no poison on the coin, the expert heaved a sigh of relief and immediately ordered his men to send Vero for treatment. On the street, Dean held Aisha's hand and continued to stroll as if nothing had happened. He felt that he was very merciful and didn't directly take his life. He took advantage of the situation and attacked. As for what happened after that, he did not pay attention to it. He was too lazy to care. Such a small character should be taught a lesson. He did not want his mood to be ruined by such a small character. It was a rare leisure time. Dean took Aisha to visit various shops and some famous scenery in the capital, such as a fountain square, a crystal garden, and so on. He found that the physical consumption of shopping was not inferior to fighting. He couldn't help but smile bitterly in his heart. He looked at Aisha, who was still as quiet as a virgin, and sighed in his heart. But soon he cheered up and said, "We bought a lot of things today. Let's go back. Those 2 sets of clothes should fit you very well. Let's go back and change them. What do you think?" Aisha's expression was calm and indifferent. Dean slightly pursed his lips, and led her back to the Rose Manor. On the way back, he heard the lords talking about Vero being injured by a sneak attack. But for the time being, they had not found out who the murderer was. But some people guessed that the other Abyss got the news and came to warn them. Because of Vero's injury, the manor was filled with a tense atmosphere. Dean didn't expect that his casual lesson would cause such a reaction. But he didn't care. He went back to his room and closed the door. He took out the jewelry and snacks he bought from a bag and piled them on the table. He handed them to Aisha one by one. 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. The lords of the manor began to gather at the training ground behind Rose Manor, including the injured Lord Vero. He was limping, his leg wrapped in white bandages, and he was using crutches. However, the number of guards around him had increased from 1 to 3. This scene was seen by a few lords who weren't on good terms with him, and they couldn't help but snicker. Some even went up to him and teased him, causing Vero's face to darken. "Lords, please send your elites to register." After the greetings, Hikari went straight to the subject. At this time, the other lords whispered a few words to the guards around them. The guards stood up and went forward to line up for registration. "Mr. Dean." Loza glanced at Aisha. He didn't expect Dean to bring her on such an occasion. He hesitated for a moment. "Both of us will participate in your name," Dean said directly. Then he took Aisha to register. In addition to the names on the registration form, they were required to write their respective magic marks. According to Hikari, this form would be handed over to Mr. Holland for inspection. Through the magic marks ability of everyone, it would be easy to assign responsibilities. Dean slightly thought for a moment and wrote the name Hunter Decapitator for his magic mark. This was the name of a legendary monster. Its ability was similar to Splitter. It was also good at attack type, but it didn't have the ability to fly. Its shortcomings were also very obvious. It was ranked behind the 20th monster. As for Aisha's magic mark, Dean also wrote a name for it. It was also an attack-type monster. In this way, it wouldn't be separated from Aisha when the responsibilities were assigned. After everyone had registered, Hikari looked at the crowd and said, "I have good news. Today, Mr. Holland will come to the scene." Wow! The crowd was boiling. Many lords exclaimed, and then their faces were full of excitement and excitement. Dean returned to Lozik's side and sat down. Losini and Loya, who were on the other side of Lozik, knew that Dean would represent their family. Their attitude towards Dean became much friendlier, especially Losini. Although she still didn't like Dean, but on the surface she no longer looked at Dean. "Mr. Holland is actually coming." "Gee, the last time I saw Mr. Holland was when he was crowned Grand Duke William." The lords whispered to each other. At this moment, Hikari suddenly sensed something and looked up. Suddenly, she saw 2 black shadows appear in the sky, elongated under the sunlight, flashing over everyone's heads. Soon, someone noticed them and let out a cry of surprise. Then, everyone looked up, and the cries of surprise suddenly became louder. "Oh my God! Miss Monica is also coming. How come she is coming?" Everyone exclaimed. All the lords couldn't help but stand up. No one dared to sit. Dean felt a burst of depression in his heart when he saw the 2 appear. This feeling was like a dense space was suddenly crowded with things. It made people feel depressed. He retracted his gaze as he didn't want to attract attention. "Huh?" Monica, who looked to be in her early 20s, suddenly looked down at the crowd. There was some surprise on her face. Holland, who was next to her, chuckled as he saw her appearance. "What's wrong? It's a bit strange, huh?" As soon as Monica said this, she was even more surprised. She looked at a woman wearing a purple veil in the crowd. "Undead? How is it possible?" "Undead." Holland was still very sensitive to these 2 words. His face slightly changed as he followed her gaze. "It is indeed the smell of undead." Dean knew that Aisha was exposed when he saw the 2 people looking at him. He sighed in his heart. The sensitivity of the Abyss couldn't be ignored. He was just trying to hide it, but now it seemed that he was being whimsical. Dean was a bit frustrated as he thought about the last time outside the giant wall, where the Abyss saw through Aisha's identity. However, he and Aisha were inseparable. Since he was seen through, he couldn't pretend to be a pig to eat the tiger. However, he didn't care. At worst, he would just cooperate with them and suffer a little more. Monica and Holland whispered a few words while Dean was thinking. The two slowly landed next to Hikari. Mr. Holland, Miss Monica. Hikari looked at Monica. There was a trace of surprise on his face. He didn't expect her to come. Horny smiled gently and said, Miss Monica wishes to travel together. Everyone, please don't take offense. Is everyone here? Everyone is here. Hikari replied. Chapter 895. Undead. Everyone was surprised as they looked in the direction of Dean. They saw the woman sitting quietly next to him. She was motionless. They felt a trace of strange and inexplicable chill. Since it was Holly who asked, it was obviously not a simple question. 7 or 8 lords were sitting around Dean hurriedly got up. Some of them were in a hurry and almost tripped over the legs of the chair. Nevertheless, no one laughed at them. They looked at Dean and his female companion in bewilderment. Undead. Lozic, who was sitting next to Dean, was so scared that he almost fell on the grass. He looked at Dean in horror, but he saw that Dean was calm, as if he didn't want to explain anything. Lozic wanted to get up and stay away from Dean, but he was afraid that he would anger Dean. He froze in place, and his hair stood on end. What is her identity? Do I need to answer you? Dean calmly looked at Holly. You only need to know that she is my female companion. Holly slightly raised his eyebrows. He didn't expect Dean to have such a big tone, but he thought of Monica's words and Dean's attitude and tone at the moment. It was obvious that Dean acquiesced to the fact that his female companion was an undead. He didn't defend himself. Secondly, he didn't seem to be afraid of the fact that Holly would capture him. His confident attitude, coupled with Monica's speculation, made Holly's eyes narrow. He knew that Monica's guess was most likely to be true. However, he was from the Abyss. It was a bit self-deceiving to think that Holly could scare him with his attitude alone. Holly glanced at the surrounding lords. He quietly looked at Dean. Are you from here? Dean indifferently said, Yes, I'm from another wall. Dean knew that he couldn't continue to hide his identity when Aisha's identity was exposed. But even if it was exposed, he wasn't worried about his own safety. The lords who wanted to scold Dean for his attitude choked as they heard Dean's words. They looked at Dean in shock. They didn't expect that a person from another world would be sitting next to them. Although the lords didn't like to leave the giant wall, but they knew how dangerous the environment outside the giant wall was. Wasn't he also a walker of the abyss if he could cross the giant wall to come here? While the lords were bewildered, Harani chuckled and said, I wonder what business your excellency has here. I'm just passing by. I heard that you know about the ice worm, so I want to inquire about it. In my opinion, you have gathered so many cannon fodder to help you explore the way outside the giant wall. Most probably you don't have a full grasp of the ice worm. How about we cooperate, and whoever finds it will get it? Dean looked at Holly and Monica. He wasn't nervous at all. His confident appearance made Holland and Monica frown. They were two Abyss experts while Dean was alone. He dared to be so arrogant in a 1 versus 2 situation. Moreover, they felt that since Dean was able to come to the banquet, he had some understanding of the situation inside the giant wall. At least he knew that the wall lord wasn't present yet. They had 3 Abyss experts on their side. However, looking at Dean's appearance, it seemed that he didn't care. Was it because of his magic marks that he was good at escaping? Or was his strength beyond that of the Abyss? Thinking of these 2 points, Horny and Monica's expressions became a bit more serious. If it was the first kind, then it would be fine. He was good at escaping, but not necessarily good at fighting. At most, he could only discuss people. But if it was the second kind, then it would be very difficult to deal with. Thinking of this, the 2 of them looked at each other and communicated with their eyes for a while. Monica shook her head slightly and signaled with her eyes. Holly saw the trace of softness in her eyes and sighed in his heart. He wanted to test Dean, but Monica refused to cooperate because there were many lords present. If they suddenly attacked Dean, it would be too big of a movement. It was inevitable that the lords would be affected. Once these lords died, there would be chaos in their territories. The chaos of war would bring a lot of innocent civilian casualties. Holly didn't care about these. Usually he would think about it, but in this special situation, he was too lazy to care about it. Monica didn't want him to act alone. If Dean was the second possibility, then he would suffer a big loss. Since you know the news, then I have nothing to say. But we found this thing first. Why should we cooperate with you? Holly's eyes were gloomy as he said in a cold voice. The surrounding lords were the overlords of their territories. They were shocked when they saw Holly's reaction. They couldn't help but turn to look at Dean. But the next moment, Dean's words made the lords go into an uproar. I'm also an abyss. Since I know about this thing, then there is no reason to give up. At least you two can't make me give up even if the Wall Lord comes. Dean said calmly, but his tone was very big. Although he hadn't fought against the abyss, but he was confident that he wouldn't lose much. He was sure that the relationship between the three abyss wasn't that close. It was impossible for them to form an alliance to fight against him. After all, the ice worm was just a piece of news. They hadn't found the real thing yet, so it was hard to say whether they could get it or not. He is an abyss. Lozic was shocked as he looked at Dean. He felt that he had overestimated Dean, but he didn't expect that Dean was also an abyss. His identity was as noble as Holly's. The other lords around them were also dumbfounded, subconsciously moving away from them. Luo, Sini, and Loya were still sitting next to Dean with their father, but at the moment their pretty faces were full of astonishment. Although they hadn't participated in the territory's governance, but at least they knew who the ruler of this world was, especially Luo Sini. Her face turned from red to white as she thought of the words she had said to Dean. She was so scared that she broke into a cold sweat. So what if he is an abyss? Don't forget that both of us are abyss. Do you think you can win against two of us? Holly sneered. Dean glanced at him and said, Is that so? Why haven't the two of you made a move? Are you afraid of affecting the other lords, or are you not sure? Or are you not willing to fight alone to avoid getting injured? Since you've noticed my female companion, then you should know whether I'm fighting one against two. In my opinion, if either of you were to team up with me, it would be the strongest alliance here. How about it? Do you want to consider it? Holly and Monica's face slightly changed as they heard Dean's words. They glanced at Aisha next to them, and their eyes flashed. Although they didn't know how Dean could make an undead so obedient. But they knew the characteristics of an undead. If a strong abyss was willing to cultivate an undead, then the power of an undead would be beyond their imagination. Both of their hearts trembled as they thought of this. Holly's face changed for a moment. You want to provoke us? Your method is too clumsy. No matter which one of us cooperates with you, we will be defeated by you in the end. It doesn't matter if the method is clumsy as long as the conditions are not bad. Dean chuckled. I won't force the two of you. You can join me at any time if you're interested. Especially Mr. Holly. I'm very optimistic about you. After all, the news about the ice worm was found by your hunting group. You know the situation in more detail. Anyway, I think we can discuss about the partnership. How about it? Chapter 896. Holland and Monica looked calm, but their hearts were filled with anger. Yes, as Dean said, the provocation was very clumsy, but the conditions given by Dean were not clumsy. Now they were basically sure that Dean was an abyss level. Plus the undead that was being controlled, it was possible that there were two abyss level forces. Moreover, these two forces were controlled by the same will. But they were different. They couldn't achieve 100% unity. If the other party secretly cooperated with Dean, then the search for the ice worm wouldn't be a problem. But if they used Dean to plan the layout of the giant wall, then it would be really terrible. The three-legged situation inside the giant wall had been formed for many years. Holland and Monica were close to each other. They knew that if one of them died, then the remaining one would be swallowed by the Wall Lord. But now there was an external force. Moreover, this force was stronger than them and could even compete with the Wall Lord. They knew that it was dangerous to cooperate with Dean, and it was impossible for them to agree. But they had to say that because of Dean's words, they were on guard against each other. They were angry, but they didn't want to fight with Dean on the spot. This was the capital. Once they fought, then the damage would be incalculable. Moreover, it would benefit the Wall Lord. Holland said in a deep voice, "Don't talk about these things. As an intruder, you better leave as soon as possible. Don't forget that we are not the only ones here. You may not be able to get a good result if we fight to the death." Dean indifferently smiled. He said that he was an intruder to tell Monica that they were in the same camp and he wouldn't betray them. He also hoped that Monica wouldn't get confused, but he had expected it. There are 3 of you, including the Wall Lord. If you don't want to cooperate with me, then I will cooperate with the Wall Lord and get rid of you. I don't know what the reward will be. The pupils of Holland and Monica shrank. Their faces exuded a bit of coldness. Monica's cheeks, which had always been quiet and gentle, were completely cold at this moment. It is impossible for the Wall Lord to cooperate with you. Instead of cooperating with you, it is better to maintain our current situation. Don't think that you can provoke us. You have ulterior motives. How can the Wall Lord collude with outsiders to murder his own people? That's true. His attitude made Monica frown. Dean continued, I don't plan to cooperate with the Wall Lord for the time being. I just want to get the ice worm. You 2 are just leading the way. Whoever gets it will get it. It's a fair thing. I'm the same as you, so I hope you won't give me face, right? Holland and Monica were relieved when they saw that Dean didn't mention about cooperating with the Wall Lord. As for Dean's words, they didn't think that it was a big problem. Not to mention that there was an unfathomable undead beside Dean. Even if Dean was alone, he was qualified to join them. After thinking for a moment, Holland slowly said, We need to discuss this matter. I will give you a reply tomorrow. Dean glanced at him. Do you think I'm a fool? Moreover, do you think you are qualified to talk to me about conditions? Don't forget that this is your lair, not mine. Don't you think the Wall Lord will have a headache because of one? Oh no, 2 abyssal devils. Do you really want to force me to make the capital feel comfortable? Their faces slightly changed as their eyes turned gloomy. Indeed, half of the reason why they were worried about Dean was because of this point. If they couldn't kill Dean on the spot, then Dean would be in the dark and they would be in the light. They could protect themselves, but they may not be able to protect the civilians inside the wall, especially the forces under their faction and their own forces. In addition to these, they had wives, children, and parents. These relatives were their fetters. Although for both of them, they might not be able to use their relatives to threaten the Wall Lord, but they knew that the Wall Lord would definitely bow his head. After all, if the Wall Lord's children were obliterated, then the Wall Lord's position would be a big problem. Well, I promise you that we will set off now to look for the ice worm together. I will provide you with the clues. Holland thought for a moment and immediately agreed. His decisiveness was surprising. Monica tilted her head and looked at him. Her eyes flashed as she suddenly understood something. She didn't object, but silently looked at Dean. Smart. Saves time. Dean praised. Gather everyone and get ready to go. If we don't hurry up and wait for the news to reach the ears of that person, who knows what will happen? The corner of Hiraini's mouth trembled slightly, and he said indifferently, You don't have to worry about that. He turned to the stunned Hikari and said, Gather everyone at the south gate. The 3 of us will go there first. Hikari was stunned for a few seconds, but responded, Yes. After that, he glanced at Dean, who was not far away. His heart jumped twice. He didn't expect that there was an abyss expert lurking under his eyelids. It was as if there was a poisonous python entrenched in his bed. It made people feel cold. Wero, who was in the crowd, was scared. His face was pale as he thought about the words he had said yesterday. His heart was about to explode. Several lords who had a good relationship with him stayed away from him for fear of attracting Dean's attention. How should I address you? Horny turned to Dudian. Dean. Well, Mr. Dean, let's go first. We'll prepare at the south gate. Horny said. Dean nodded and led Aisha to get up. Holland and Monica didn't say much. They came over to communicate with the lords to appease their hearts. But Dean's previous words about gathering cannon fodder made them not want to say anything more. They just wanted to leave as soon as possible. He wasn't afraid of the lords reneging on their words. After all, everyone could see how bad their mood was at the moment. It was absolutely asking for trouble. The 2 of them flew up and went back the way they came. Dark mucus flowed out of the splitter on Dean's back, forming a brand on his back. Soon, the brand turned into a solid object. 2 ferocious wings composed of countless blades stretched out, overturning the surrounding chairs. He grabbed Aisha and soared into the sky. Soon, he caught up with Horny and Monica, leaving behind a shocked expression on the faces of the lords. Oh. Chapter 897. Feeling that Dean was chasing after them, Holland and Monica's eyes swept over the ferocious wings on his back. Their eyes flashed slightly. Such magic wings were unique in their giant wall. It was obvious that they came from the giant wall where Dean was. "Mr. Dean, you passed by here. Where are you going? You might as well tell me. I'm also going to a place recently. Maybe we were going the same way." Holland faintly smiled after Dean caught up. Since he had agreed to cooperate with Dean, he wouldn't continue to keep a straight face. It would be more useful to take the opportunity to inquire about Dean's situation. "Where are you going? You might as well tell me. Maybe we were going the same way." Dean looked indifferent as he repeated Holland's words almost verbatim. Holland's mouth slightly twitched. Mr. Dean is really not willing to suffer a little bit. "Same here." Dean glanced at the two. "Both of you don't seem to have magic marks from here, right? Why do you think so?" Holland chuckled. "Has Mr. Dean seen all the legendary magic marks here?" "No, but at least I have seen the supplicant and the spirit," Dean said. In fact, he hadn't seen the demonization state of these two magic marks after they were integrated into the human body. But he could speculate from their abilities that Holland and Monica didn't have these two magic marks. They were from the Abyss. If they didn't use the strongest legendary magic marks of the wall, then Dean wouldn't be able to understand. Moreover, he knew that the Abyss walkers could cross the giant wall and even go to the kingdom of God. It wasn't difficult to get non-local magic marks. After all, if they lived in the Abyss and used local magic marks, then they would inevitably be targeted. Any magic mark had its weakness, but if they used legendary magic marks from other areas, then the ability was unknown. Most people wouldn't be able to target them. Holland raised his eyebrows as he knew the meaning of Dean's words. He didn't deny it. "Mr. Dean, if you are interested, we might as well exchange information about the magic marks. How about it?" "Okay." Dean quickly agreed. Horny stared at Dudian for a moment and laughed. "Forget it. It's boring to talk about these things." Dean shrugged slightly. The premise of exchanging information was trust. Both sides couldn't trust each other. This kind of exchange was obviously a joke. Only a fool would tell the other his real magic mark ability. "Mr. Dean, which giant wall do you come from? Maybe we are in the same camp?" Horny said to Dudian. "Really?" Dean's eyes flashed. "Same camp? Could it be that there will be an alliance between the giant wall?" At this time, he suddenly thought of Aristotle who had gone to the divine kingdom. He suddenly came to a realization. If these wall lords went to the divine kingdom, they would naturally have the opportunity to meet and make friends there. There might even be great characters above them. Where there were people, there would be struggles and factions. This was a truth that had never changed since ancient times. Dudian asked, "What is it called here?" Horny helplessly said as he saw that Dean didn't take the initiative. "We are called Kegel Giant Wall. Kegel is the name of our god of war. It represents courage in the god of war family." There was a touch of pride on his face. Even though he was an Abyss walker, it didn't prevent him from worshiping the god of war family. This belief was rooted in the depths of his soul since childhood. "Kegel," Dean murmured. He didn't doubt that Horny would lie to him. After all, this kind of thing could be casually asked by any lord. But he didn't care about it and ignored it. "Mr. Dean, it's your turn." Horny frowned as he saw Dean was silent. Dean recovered and said, "The place where I live is called China. The god of war who protects us is the dragon. So we call ourselves the descendants of the dragon. The spirit of the dragon is to strive for self-improvement, fight against all disasters, and constantly strive for self-improvement." "China? The god of war is called the dragon?" Horny was startled as he suspiciously looked at Dean. The name was a bit strange as he had never heard of it. But he hadn't heard of the giant wall, so he couldn't judge whether Dean was lying or not. But looking at Dean's expression, it didn't seem like he was lying. "How is it? Are we allies?" Dean interrupted Horny's thoughts. He didn't want him to think about it. Horny shook his head. "I don't know. You have to ask the wall master." Dean didn't care. In fact, allies had to stand aside in front of the ice worm. At this time, The three of them had flown over the south gate of the king's city. Horny was the first to glide down, followed by Monica. They inadvertently pulled a little distance away from Dean. Although Monica's performance was very obscure, but Dean still felt it. He couldn't help but look at the woman's back. He narrowed his eyes as he had some thoughts in his mind. The next moment, he also landed on the south gate of the king's city. "Greetings, Mr. Horny. Greetings, Miss Monica." The guards on the gate saw the two of them and quickly bowed to greet them. No one recognized Dean and Aisha, but they didn't dare to neglect them. After all, they were able to follow the two Abyss Masters. How could they be simple people? "Is everyone here?" Horny restored his calmness. There was a bit of majesty in his tone. One of them said, "Everyone is here." Horny narrowed his eyes as he looked forward. He was about to open his mouth to say something. Suddenly, his eyes moved. Monica, who was behind him, almost turned around at the same time. Whoosh! A figure quickly flew over and landed on the city wall. The surrounding guards were shocked as they saw the person. They hurriedly knelt down. "Greetings, Wall Master." Dean's eyes narrowed as he looked at the person who was 5 meters away from him. It was a middle-aged man with a beard. His skin was full of strength. His eyes were bright and his eyebrows were thick and broad. He was full of majesty. He looked at Aisha, who was next to him. There was a deep meaning in his eyes. He turned to Horny and Monica. "You don't have to be so polite. Who is this?" Horny didn't expect him to come in person. He was surprised but soon calmed down. He immediately introduced, "This is Mr. Dean from China's Wall." "China's Wall?" Barker looked at Dean. "Mr. Dean, what brings you here?" Dean felt that his lie had been seen through. He calmly said, "I was just passing by and heard the news about the ice worm, so I came to inquire about it. After all, the Wall Lord won't believe me even if I give up on it. It would be better for us to work together and overcome the difficulties first. Whoever gets it will get it." Barker's eyes flickered slightly, and he nodded. "That's true. Treasures belong to those who are capable. Moreover, the extreme ice worm is in the swamp magic pit. Having an expert like Mr. Dean is also an additional layer of protection. I have no objections. Horny, do you two agree?" Horny replied, "We naturally agree. It will be easier to do things if Mr. Dean joins us." Barker nodded. "In that case, let's set off early." Horny and Monica were startled. Their faces slightly changed, but soon returned to normal. Horny nodded. "Yes, but there are still some people who haven't gathered yet. Wall Master, please wait for a moment." Barker nodded. Monica suddenly said, "Wall Lord, if you go with us, wouldn't it be too dangerous? If something happens, we will need you to stay here." Barker glanced at her, and his expression became much gentler as he said, "I've already made arrangements. There's no need to worry." Monica's lips moved as she saw that Barker was so confident, but she didn't try to persuade him. Horley maintained a smile on the side, but in his heart he was cursing. Originally, Barker wouldn't participate, but now he came over and didn't expel Dean. It was obvious that he intended to use Dean to weaken their strength. Chapter 898. Dean had a sense of crisis after the appearance of Barker, but Barker's appearance didn't surprise him too much. When he was exposed, he considered that he would face the joint attack of 3 Abyssal Masters. He even considered that there were hidden Abyssal Masters here. He was ready to face 4 Abyssal Masters at the same time. From the current situation, it seemed that Barker didn't intend to participate before. But now, because of Dean's existence, Dean wasn't sure what his purpose was. It was possible that he wanted to unite with Holland and Monica to deal with him, or there was another possibility that he wanted to use Dean's hand to get rid of these two. Dean didn't continue to think about these possibilities. Plans were always better than changes, especially in a situation where the situation outside the giant wall was changing rapidly. Once he was weak, he would inevitably suffer a group attack. The only guarantee of safety was not to get injured. He slightly distanced himself from Barker, Horny, and Monica in case the 3 of them suddenly launched a sneak attack. Barker and the other 2 noticed Dean's movement but didn't say anything. It was normal to have such concerns. If not, It would seem too confident and even stupid. After a moment, the masters gathered by Hikari arrived one after another. At this time, Dean saw that on the plains outside the south gate, there were hundreds of pioneer-level masters gathered there. At the same time, there were 8 rulers and 23 inner wilderness-level masters. Such a lineup completely crushed Sylvia's strength. Horny stepped forward to reorganize. After a moment, a team of nearly 500 pioneers was formed. 5 dominators, including Dean and Aisha, led the team. 17 dominators acted as deputies as they marched out of the giant wall. Should we share the information about the ice worm now? Dean said to Holland on the way. Monica and Barker's eyes flashed, but they didn't show it on the surface. It seemed that they didn't hear Dean's words. Holland glanced at them and smiled. Of course. When we get to the giant wall, I will say it. It's not suitable to discuss here. Dean saw that he agreed, so he didn't say anything. In less than half an hour, everyone came to the giant wall. The rulers and pioneers who had the ability to fly took the lead to fly up the giant wall. They threw down ropes to guide the other pioneers. Dean, Barker, Horny, and others all had the ability to take off. They took the lead and climbed the giant wall. They stood at a height of 1 kilometer. The blue sky and white clouds above their heads seemed to be a lot closer to them. It made their hearts flutter. Holland came to the edge of the giant wall and took out a scroll from his arms. He spread it on the edge of the platform. It was a map. A strong wind blew past. Horny pressed his palm on the map and pointed to a place. This is the outer edge of the Swamp Demon Pit, the southwest area. This is the trail of the extreme ice worm that my hunting team found. Dean didn't get too close in case they suddenly attacked. After all, they were at the same level of the same level. After all, they would have the same level. If they were attacked, they would inevitably be seriously injured or even lose their life. It was like 2 adults. The map was very detailed. It was the first time for Dean to see such a detailed map of the giant wall. First of all, the giant wall stood in the center of the map. It occupied less than 1/10 of the total map area. Around the giant wall, the terrain was divided by different colors. There were gray areas, light red areas, green areas, and so on. The place that Holland pointed to was a black area. There were a few white letters in the middle of the black area. They spelled out the meaning of the swamp. Dean's eyes swept the map. In addition to the swamp, he also wrote down other nearby areas. At this time, he looked at Barker and Monica. He suddenly said, "Wall Lord, you are the Lord of the Wall. You are far-sighted. Do you have any suggestions?" Barker wrinkled his eyebrows as he saw Dean's sudden attack. After all, Holland knows the most details. Let's listen to what he has to say first. Horny's expression changed slightly. He knew that Barker also wanted to know the most detailed information from him. He snorted coldly in his heart, but on the surface he was very calm. He said, "The traces of the extreme ice insects are at the edge of the swamp magic pit, and the extreme ice insects like Een and hate heat. Everyone knows this. The center of the swamp magic pit has the lowest temperature, so I think the extreme ice insects are likely to go there." Monica and Barker wrinkled their brows, but didn't say anything. Dean pondered for a moment. Does Mr. Horny have any good suggestions? As far as I know, the deeper we go, the more dangerous it gets. Even if the 5 of us go together, it's hard to guarantee that there won't be any accidents. Do we have to force our way through? Horny smiled indifferently and said, "Mr. Dean, you must be joking. It's impossible to force our way through. Even if we had twice the number of people, we would still be at a disadvantage. Let's go to the location of the extreme ice worm first, and let Monica see if she can track the direction of the extreme ice worm. If she can find it, then we can follow the route of the extreme ice worm." Dean didn't speak, but looked at Barker and Monica. To be honest, Holland's words were all nonsense. But at least he had revealed one piece of information. Monica's ability was related to tracking. 2 pieces of information were derived from this one piece of information. Barker and Holland weren't good at tracking. Tracking could be classified as a type of perception. If one wasn't good at perception, then they would be good at attack and defense. Barker saw that Dean didn't have any objection, so he looked at Monica. "Are you sure?" Monica slowly nodded. Let's try. The decision was made. Everyone continued to set off. They crossed the giant wall and went all the way to the swamp. On the way, Dean asked Holland for the map. He looked at it several times and asked, "What are these areas?" Holland knew that Dean wasn't familiar with these situations, so he couldn't refuse. In fact, even if Dean asked the Lord, he would know the information on the map. He was too lazy to hide it. They passed through two large areas. One was a gray area close to the giant wall. In this gray area, they met a lot of undeads and high-level monsters. Most of them were at the level of limitless. Occasionally, the weaker ones were at the level of senior hunters. Fortunately, the lowest level of the assembled team was pioneer level. They crushed all the monsters along the way without any damage. After passing through the gray area, they came to a yellow area. The level of monsters here was obviously higher. Occasionally, they would encounter the attacks of pioneer-level monsters. Some of these monsters were good at hiding. Some were lurking in the soil. Some were camouflaged like a stone. Even Dean couldn't tell if they were real or fake. Of course, he didn't look carefully. He was saving his physical strength to prepare for the battle in the swamp. The monsters they encountered along the way were all seen through in advance by other rulers or demon generals. They were directly cleaned up. There were close to 500 people in the team, and there were many perception-type experts. Their perceptual abilities were also very strange. Some had special vision, some had special hearing, and some had mysterious senses that allowed them to sense danger. In front of such a mighty team, it was difficult for ordinary monsters to hide. After a long journey of 4 or 5 hours, they finally came to the swamp. Dean clearly felt that the atmosphere in the hunting team had calmed down. There were fewer whispers. As they approached the edge of the swamp, they met a demon general-level monster. It was like a giant undead. It directly attacked them and was killed by a ruler who was in the front. "Here we are," Holland said. He looked up at the lifeless land in front of him and the occasional concrete building wreckage. He whispered, "Pass down the order. Let everyone be vigilant and lurk forward." A devil general at the side immediately passed on his words. The dark golden light flashed in Dean's eyes. The radiation concentration in this area was far stronger than in other areas. Monsters love to live in areas with high radiation concentration. Chapter 899. As Dean was looking around, Horny called out a team of 10 people led by a ruler. They took the lead to explore the swamp magic pit. 10 minutes later, the exploration team used a signal flare to send back information that they were safe. Horny waved his hand to let the team follow. Baker and Monica didn't have any objection. They gave full command to Horny. After all, Horny was the initiator of the operation. The intelligence came from his men, and the manpower was also gathered by Horny. Although Baker was the leader of the wall, he couldn't say anything at the moment. Moreover, the current situation was complicated. He wanted to spend more time on other places. As for Monica, she didn't like to stand out. As long as Horny didn't make a big command mistake, she didn't intend to say anything. Dean also didn't want to stand out. He wasn't familiar with the situation here. It was best to let them command. Therefore, the 5 people stepped into the swamp magic pit with Horny as the leader. Everyone be careful. This is a monster paradise. Most of the monsters here are at the level of 10,000 behead. There are even hundreds of monsters. Don't fall behind, Horny said to the ruler. The ruler immediately passed the message. Dean knew from the top-secret information collected by Aristotle that there was more than one magic pit outside the giant wall. However, the word swamp was added in front of the magic pit. He didn't see any swamp basin along the way. He couldn't help but ask Horny. The swamp magic pit is not an ordinary swamp, but a demonic swamp. It is said that there is an extremely terrifying demonic swamp monster in this magic pit. Its body is huge, and it can transform into a huge swamp. Anyone who steps into it will die without a doubt. Even abyssal people like you and I are no exception. So this place is called the Swamp Magic Pit. Dean was surprised. He didn't expect the name to come from this place. He thought that it was full of swamps and wetlands. However, The monster mentioned by Horny was more terrible than swamps and wetlands. What kind of size would it have to transform into a swamp? What kind of magical structure was it? Dean couldn't imagine it, but his mind couldn't help but think of the strange life-sucking trees in the Forest of Despair. Could it be that the monsters in the Forest of Despair were on the same level as the monsters in the Forest of Despair? Horny laughed as he saw Dudyen's face change. "Mr. Dean, you don't have to worry too much. The Devil's Pit is very big, and the monsters like to appear on the south side of the pit. That area is low-lying and suitable for them to form a swamp basin. Generally, we won't meet them unless our luck is really bad. But even if we meet them, the Vanguard team in front will send back the information in time. We will have enough time to retreat." Dean slowly nodded. He still had the flesh and blood of the origami. He would be able to deter this thing and escape. Thinking of this, he glanced at Horny. "You guys look so fearless. Could it be that you also have the flesh of the origami?" Horny's heart jumped when he saw Dean's eyes. He was a bit surprised. Did Dean see what he was thinking? Was this the ability of his magic mark, similar to mind reading? Soon Horny rejected this idea. If Dean really had the ability to read minds, he wouldn't have reacted like this. Moreover, mind reading was too magical and couldn't explain the principle. In his view, all the magic mark abilities were based on biological changes, including the hallucination of the spirit. Although it sounded magical, there were many living beings in nature that had this kind of ability. It was a point that living beings could reach. But he didn't think that the magical abilities, such as telekinesis and killing people, didn't exist because no living beings had such abilities. It was beyond the scope of biological abilities and couldn't be explained. Dean didn't know that the man in front of him was thinking about some strange things. He glanced at him and then retracted his gaze. He turned his head as if nothing had happened and continued to move forward. What Horny said was right. This was indeed a monster paradise. Not long after Dean and others came in, they were ambushed by monsters one after another. In less than half an hour, more than a dozen pioneers were killed in the periphery of the main force. The Vanguard team in front also disintegrated. Only the leader of the team escaped back with 2 giant pythons and chased after them. When the giant python rushed to the front, everyone saw that there were not 2 giant pythons, but a 2-headed python. It was huge and as thick as a tree trunk. It rushed all the way, crushing the new small trees. The old cement building foundation that collapsed in the green grass and soil was once again pressed down and even shattered. Ice and fire twin dragons. He didn't expect to encounter such a troublesome monster. He turned to look at Dudyen. This is a level 280 monster. It's almost impossible for the Dominator to defeat it. We can only rely on ourselves. Dudyen. It's a level 280 monster. It's almost impossible for the Dominator to defeat it. Dean noticed the word almost, which meant that the ruler could still defeat it. He said, "A level 280 monster shouldn't require us to take action, right?" He said it casually, but in his heart, he knew that it was a bit pretentious. A level 280 monster. This was the first time he had heard of such a high-level monster. He didn't know what level such a monster would be if it was converted to the human level. However, from Horny's words, he had a faint guess, so he said it to verify his thoughts. Horny saw that Dean was so arrogant, so he slightly smiled and said, "Although it's not level 300, the ice and fire dragons have special abilities. Their strength has been underestimated a lot. Even if we meet them, it will be very difficult to kill them, especially the perception type of the Abyss. We may not even be the opponent of this thing. Now we can only rely on ourselves to take action. If we hand it over to the other rulers, the loss will be too serious. It will cause too much movement and attract more terrible things." Horny is right. We can only rely on ourselves. Barker nodded. Monica glanced at Dean and said, "Mr. Dean, we won't force you if you don't want to take action. Is that so? Then I won't make a move." Dean saw her goading and said indifferently. Monica frowned slightly, and a trace of anger flashed across her eyes. Her figure suddenly flew out, and her palm touched her loose skirt. She actually took out a sharp sword that flickered with silver light and rushed towards the ice and fire twin dragons that were flying over. Horny and Barker didn't say anything and rushed up after her. Dean crossed his arms and watched from the spot. Horny said that it would be very difficult for the Abyss to deal with the monster alone. But if 3 Abyss Masters attacked together, it would be much easier. Soon, the 3 of them were engaged in a fierce battle with the ice and fire twin dragons. The 2 heads of the ice and fire twin dragons roared furiously and bit at the 3 of them. One head spat out a cold mist while the other spat out flames. Their abilities were exactly as their name suggested. Chapter 900. Dean found that the 3 of them didn't use their demonic forms. It seems that they didn't want him to know their demonic forms and abilities. However, the 3 of them cooperated with each other and soon suppressed the ice and fire twin dragons. Dean's heart was filled with regret. He hoped that the monsters would be able to make a comeback and at least force out something. Unfortunately, his hopes did not come true. Under the attacks of the 3 of them, the flaming snake head of the ice and fire twin dragons was quickly cut off. After dealing with one of the snake heads, the 3 of them worked together to attack the remaining snake head that was spitting out cold mist. In less than 2 to 3 minutes, they pierced through the head of the snake head and killed it with a single strike. Good. The spectators couldn't help but cheer in a low voice. Despite the suppression of their voices, the cheers of nearly 500 people were still relatively loud, scaring Horny and the other 2 who had just finished their battle. Horny glared at the people around him and quickly shouted in a low voice, "Silence." When they heard this, everyone stopped speaking resentfully. Monica frowned. She raised her silver sword and cut off the fangs of the ice and fire twin dragons. She buried them on the spot. She looked at Barker and Horny. "I have enough. The rest is yours." Horny smiled bitterly. Monica had taken the most valuable thing from the ice and fire twin dragons. The 4 fangs were excellent weapon materials that could be forged into weapons with the characteristics of flames and ice. Moreover, these weapons were dipped in poison that could paralyze the nervous system. If they were forged into weapons, they would definitely be a great weapon of mass destruction. Horny and Barker didn't say anything as they considered that Monica had contributed the most. Their demand for weapons was relatively low. It was related to their demonic forms. Once they were demonized, their arms would turn into beasts and they wouldn't be able to hold a sword. Unless the weapon was forged into a demonized form, it would be useless. Horny stepped forward and cut off a few scales from the snake's head and buried them on the spot. Barker wryly smiled. "You 2 have picked all the good ones. You're really cunning." Horny smiled. "Don't say that. Even if I gave it to you, you wouldn't like it. Monica's is more like it." Monica snapped. "Don't be stingy. Don't drag me into it." Barker smiled and said, "Forget it. Let's get ready to set out." Horny nodded slightly. Previously, the cheers of the crowd were relatively loud, and it was inevitable that some monsters wandering nearby would be attracted. They had to evacuate this place cleanly. Dean didn't say anything as he saw the 3 divide up the prey. After all, he didn't contribute. Moreover, they buried the thing on the spot. It was obvious that they didn't care about it. It was just a dispensable thing and not a treasure. "Mr. Dean, do you want to go up and pick something?" Horny returned to Dean and smiled. Dean indifferently replied, "No need." Monica glanced at him but said nothing. Everyone continued to move forward, and soon they encountered demonic creatures again. However, they were just a few pioneer-level demonic creatures, and they were easily killed by the Vanguard team. Half an hour later, everyone finally arrived at the place where the extreme ice worm had appeared. Horny pointed to a snake-shaped slide mark in front of him and said, "Look, this is the trace left by the extreme ice worm." Dean, Barker, and Monica didn't wait for Horny to say anything as they looked at the slide mark. The green grass around the slide mark was completely frozen, and the air was filled with a touch of moisture and fishy smell. Dean looked around. The moisture in the air was thick, and he was very familiar with the smell. It was the smell of the crystal wasteland worm. He was completely sure that what he had absorbed was the extreme ice worm. Monica and Barker were also looking around. After a moment, Monica nodded and said, "This smell is indeed the smell of the extreme ice worm. Judging from the concentration, it shouldn't have been more than 5 days since it left this place. Moreover, it seems to be in the molting stage, so it shouldn't have gone far." Barker was interested and asked, "How do you know that it is in the molting stage?" "Look carefully. There are wrinkles similar to scales in the slide mark." Monica pointed. Dean and Barker looked at the slide mark. On the surface, the slide mark was very smooth, but after a moment of concentration, they could see very subtle convex traces. Dean couldn't help but look at Monica. Was her perception related to her vision? But looking at her skills in the previous battle with the ice and fire twin dragons, her swordsmanship was sharp and her figure was illusory. She wasn't inferior to Barker and Horny. Was she hiding something, or were they hiding something? Barker nodded as Dean was thinking. "Indeed, let's look around here. I hope it hasn't finished molting." "Okay." As Horny spoke, he turned to the ruler beside him and ordered 10 people in a team. Organize 10 teams and search the surrounding 50 kilometers. "Yes." Horny said to Barker after the ruler passed down his words, "We shouldn't stay here for long. The smell will attract other things. We should leave as soon as possible and search ahead." "Okay." Everyone continued to move forward under the leadership of Horny. 10 squads with a total of 100 people spread out in the surroundings. Once they found the trace of the ice worm, they would send a signal. Horny looked at the yellow signal that was shot out from the ruins in front of them. At the same time, a red smoke bomb rose in the direction of 4 o'clock. It was a danger warning signal and also a signal to request for reinforcements. Horny's face slightly changed. He was about to send reinforcements, but stopped. There was a trace of gloominess in his eyes. Dean saw the change in Horny's expression. He asked knowingly, "The squad that went over there is in danger. Do we need reinforcements?" Barker shook his head slightly. "I don't think it is necessary. Horny's hearing should be the sharpest among us. It seems that the people there are in danger." Horny didn't care about exposing his ability. Monica and Barker already knew about it. Moreover, his sensitive hearing wasn't his main ability. He was good at attacking. His sensitive hearing was just incidental, so he didn't feel any threat from Dean. They should have met a big guy. They were all destroyed. That thing is left. Dean asked, "Aren't we going to avenge them?" Horny's face turned black. The leader of the team is a ruler. Most of the monsters that can annihilate them are above level 300. Since it has left, we shouldn't provoke it. Oh, Dean didn't say anything. Chapter 901. They followed the tracks for 7 or 8 minutes before the tracks suddenly disappeared. Horny seemed to have expected this and said to Monica next to him, "My hunting group tracked it here, and then there was no news. Can you see where it went?" Without waiting for him to ask, Monica had already used her ability to observe the tiny clues at the end of the slide mark. A moment later, she frowned and said in a low voice, "This thing seems to have been captured by something else." "Captured?" Holland and Barker's face changed. The next moment their eyes flashed as they stared at Monica. Barker said in a low voice, "Are you serious?" Monica knew what they were guessing, but she didn't care. She pointed to a spot in front of them and said, "There's some mucus left by something here. It's already dried, so you can't smell it. This mucus has no smell, so it should be a monster that's very good at hiding. You can pry open the soil below and touch it." Horny gave the ruler next to him a look. The ruler understood and immediately went forward to pry open the place Monica was pointing at. He dug out a small hole and immediately felt a sticky sensation on his fingers. He turned around and returned to Horny's side. He nodded and said, "Sir, this soil is indeed strange. It's very wet." Holland stared at him. "Nonsense." Miss Monica said that there is monster's mucus. How can it not be wet? The ruler was startled, but quickly reacted. He bowed to Monica. "Miss Monica, this subordinate didn't mean to offend you. Please forgive me." "It's nothing." Monica looked indifferent. "The ice worm has fallen into the hands of the monster. It will be more difficult for us to find it. Do you have any countermeasures?" Holland and Barker looked at each other and pondered. Dean had long noticed the mucus in the soil. Although he was an offensive type, but his vision was excellent. He thought that Holland and Barker could also see it. He didn't expect that only Monica would notice it. He glanced at the three. If the ice worm is found by the monster, will it be eaten? The three turned to look at Dean. There was a trace of surprise in their eyes. Dean was puzzled by the three. He realized that he might have asked a question of common sense, but he didn't hide it anymore. He frowned. What's wrong? Horny smiled as he saw that Dean didn't know. Mr. Dean, did you just become an Abyss member? The extreme ice insect is the ancestor of the parasitic soulworm. If the parasitic soulworm can live in a monster's body, then the extreme ice insect can too. Furthermore, it's much easier to invade than the parasitic soulworm. Even if this monster already has a parasitic soulworm, it can only give way to the extreme ice insect. Otherwise, it can only be eaten. Dean raised his eyebrows as he understood. No wonder the three were so surprised. In their opinion, this was basic common sense. As for Horny's words, he was too lazy to pay attention to it. Who told him to be an Abyss expert? So denying it now would make it more realistic. If the extreme ice worm enters the body of this monster, what use is there for us to capture it? Dean asked again. He didn't care if the question would show that he was ignorant. As long as he could get the answer he wanted, it was fine. After all, if they were to fight, he would have to rely on his own skills. Of course it's useful. Horny smiled, but didn't explain to Dean why it was useful. Why? Dean continued to carry out the spirit of not being ashamed to ask questions. Horny was speechless, but since Dean asked, he didn't want to be vague. He said, generally, when the parasitic soul worm enters the monster's body, it will passively master the monster's ability. But the extreme ice worm is different. It can master the monster's ability, but at the critical time, it can also get rid of this ability and return to its own purity. Dean understood. He thought for a moment and didn't ask anything more. Monica and Barker looked at Dean. Their expressions were calm and didn't show any thoughts. Monica, can you see the size and type of this monster? Horny turned to Monica and asked. It's not more than 10 meters tall. It's a reptile, cold-blooded creature. Like other cold-blooded monsters, it's good at hiding. I don't know anything else, Monica said calmly. Can you track its whereabouts? Horny asked again. Monica gave him a look and said, if I could find it, I would have said it earlier. That's true. So, even you can't find the trace of this thing. This is a bit tricky. Do we have to rely on a carpet search? Horny felt a headache coming on. If it were any other area, he could still spread out a large force to search. However, this was a magic swamp pit. Monsters above level 300 were very common, especially in the central area. There were even monsters that they couldn't resist, such as the demon swamp monsters. We can assume that the extreme ice bug has already taken control of this demon. The extreme ice bug likes low temperatures. If I remember correctly, there's an ice lake in the swamp magic pit. It's very likely to go there, Buckles said. Horny glanced at him and said, but that is the inner area of the swamp magic pit, close to the center, and there's an Arctic ice dragon living in the ice lake. The evaluation given by the Magic Kingdom Academy is 372. Even if the few of us work together, we may not be able to defeat it, let alone in the ice lake, which is its home ground. Barkle shook his head and said, that's true, but don't forget how many people we have here. If we really encounter that thing, we only need to hold it back for a while and let the others fill up the frozen lake or evaporate it. It's like a bird with broken wings, and it might not be a match for us on land. Don't you have a list of these people's abilities? See how many of them have fire abilities or the ability to move rocks. Horny thought for a moment and looked at Monica and Dean. What do you think? Monica nodded and said, although the risk is a little high, it is indeed feasible. We can take this opportunity to kill this ice dragon. When we come here again in the future, we can avoid a huge hidden danger. If it stays here for too long and mutates again, it will be even more troublesome. I don't care. I will listen to you. Dean also said, well, we will go to the ice lake according to the wall's plan. Horny made a decision and immediately gave the order. At the same time, He recalled the 10 teams that were exploring the surroundings. However, at this moment, 3 of the 10 teams had already sent out danger signals. Most likely, they were in trouble. Horny was too lazy to mobilize others to help, so he directly abandoned them. This time, he had gathered so many people to act as pathfinders and cannon fodder. If they went to help the cannon fodder, then it would be more dangerous if they stayed here for a long time. After all, danger could happen at any time outside the giant wall. Moreover, the Devil's Pit was a dangerous area. It was possible to encounter more terrifying monsters if they stayed for more than a minute. There were 400 or 500 people gathered here, and the heat source was enough to alarm many monsters. Although most of them used items to cover up their aura, but it was hard to say whether they could hide from the perception of the Abyss-level monsters. Horny's worries soon came true. Less than 3 minutes later, the Vanguard squad in front of them broke out a deafening roar. Dean and others felt the ground tremble, even though they were more than 10 miles away. The trees and weeds in the surroundings slightly tilted. Even the puddles on the side of the road rippled. A golden light flashed in Dean's eyes. His X-ray vision penetrated through the wreckage in front of him. He saw a huge rock monster crawling out of the ground more than 10 miles away. It was nearly 20 meters tall, and its structure was very similar to that of a human. It was a giant made of rock. Quartz monster. Monica's face slightly changed as she whispered. Horny and Barker's expressions also changed. They looked at each other, and Horny immediately made a decision. Finish this quickly. Kill them. What is its level? Dean frowned. Chapter 902. Abyss Level. Dean's heart shivered. Through the conversation with Horny and the others, he had a better understanding of the human strength corresponding to the hunting level. If it was more than 300, it should belong to the first level of the Abyss, and that Arctic frost dragon had reached 372. It was undoubtedly an extremely strong level in the Abyss. Quartz monster. This is the outer edge of the swamp magic pit. How could we encounter this thing? What should we do? The hunting group was in a panic. Although Horny's voice was low, the people present were pioneers and even the dominators of the inner wilderness. Their hearing was so sharp that they could hear a pin drop. In addition, there were many people with excellent vision or sensitive perception who could directly sense the situation in front of them. When the words quartz monster came out, it made people panic. Although there were 5 Abyss-level masters present, but in front of them was a very strong Abyss monster. Would the 5 Abyss-level masters stand up for them, the cannon fodder? When Horny didn't hesitate to abandon the exploration teams, the hunting group was in danger. If it wasn't for Baker's presence, they would have already scattered and fled. Nevertheless, at this moment, most of them had already made up their minds. Once there was danger, they would save their lives first. As for whether they could return to the giant wall, and whether they would be chased by Baker after returning, they didn't care so much. It's too late to escape. Even if we can escape, they can't. Without them, we have to rely on ourselves to explore the way. Horny saw Dean frown and immediately said, "It's not difficult to kill it with the 4 of us plus your female companion. I don't believe that 1 against 5 can make it turn over the sky." Dean naturally knew this truth, so he said, "All right, but it's just an Abyss monster. The 4 of us are enough." When the 3 saw that he didn't intend to let Aisha fight, they slightly frowned. Monica said, "If we want to fight quickly, it's better for the 5 of us to fight together. The bigger the noise, the worse it will be for us." "I know. Instead of being verbose here, I think it's better to fight immediately. I don't believe that the 4 of us can't deal with it," Dean said in a cold voice. Monica frowned and wanted to say something, but Baker interrupted. "In that case, let's go." Finished speaking, he leapt up and charged in the direction of the quartz demonic beast. In the blink of an eye, he had already flown 4 to 5 kilometers away. Seeing that he was trying to smooth things over and take the initiative to make a move, Horny didn't have much else to say. He ordered the ruler beside him to stand by and wait for orders, and then he followed. Dean ignored Monica and chased with Aisha. Although he didn't intend to let Aisha fight, but he was used to keeping her by his side. She could just watch the fight from the side. Dean saw that Baker and Horny were fighting with the quartz beast by the time he got close to the battlefield. They were fighting while retreating. It was obvious that they wanted to wait for Dean and Monica to come over to help them. Dean sneered in his heart as he saw that both of them didn't use their magic body. He didn't use his magic body either. He pulled out a splitter and rushed forward. He saw that the quartz demonic beast's body was petrified as if it was made of stone. However, it was impossible for a stone to mutate into a creature. It was most likely that the quartz demonic beast liked to eat stones, which led to its body being petrified. Dean rushed up and chopped its toes. The quartz beast that was attracted by Horny and Barkle roared. It looked down and waved its huge stone fist towards Dean. Dean's face slightly changed as he cursed in his heart. He immediately jumped back. The quartz demonic beast roared as it chased after Dean. It completely abandoned Horny and Baker. Dean was angry as he saw the situation. He had underestimated the shamelessness of these two. Although it seemed that they were restraining the quartz demonic beast, they didn't cause any actual damage to it. On the contrary, he had casually cut the quartz demonic beast and immediately pulled its hatred toward him. At this time, Monica also caught up. She froze for a moment as she saw the quartz demonic beast chasing after Dean. However, she quickly understood and immediately rushed forward. Dean was a little relieved as he saw Monica rushing from behind. Although he didn't like this woman's mouth, but she was more simple than Baker and Horny. On the other hand, the two were anxiously chasing the quartz demonic beast. However, they always kept a certain distance from it. It seemed that they couldn't catch up no matter what. Dean was very angry. He didn't lead the quartz demonic beast to Monica. Instead, he suddenly stopped and then rushed forward. The quartz demonic beast couldn't react in time. Dean took advantage of the situation and passed by its legs. The quartz demonic beast turned its head and immediately met Horny and Baker, who were chasing in midair. Both of them didn't expect Dean to suddenly make such a move. Their faces suddenly changed. However, they couldn't pretend anymore as they were facing the quartz demonic beast. They could only bite the bullet and continue to restrain it. Dean's face turned cold as he saw the two attack the quartz demonic beast. He said, "If we don't solve this thing as soon as possible and attract other monsters, then we won't have a good fruit to eat. What's the point of acting too fake?" Dean's voice wasn't loud, but Horny and Baker could hear it clearly. Both of them were embarrassed. The next moment, Baker took the lead to say, "Brother Dean misunderstood. The skin of this quartz demonic beast is thick. Although we attacked it with all our strength, but it didn't have much effect. It seems that we have to go all out and enter the demonic body to fight." Dean coldly snorted. "If that's the case, then what are we waiting for?" Horny gently smiled. The weapon in his hand quickly melted. In the blink of an eye, his body turned into a nearly 3 meters tall blackbird. His head was protruding like a crow's head. His face was covered with feathers. Only a little of the original outline could be seen. He had 4 wings. They were as black as ink and had no feathers. If one looked closely, one could see that the inside of the wings was attached with sharp black needles. If one was hit by the wings or hugged by the wings, then it would inevitably cause terrible damage. Dean's eyes flashed as he saw the changes. He had never seen such a demonic body before. On the other side, Baker also entered the demonic body state. His body was like a human-shaped skeleton, but there was a pair of huge bone wings on his back. He looked like a devil that had returned from the underworld. His arms maintained the shape of a human skeleton's palm. He was holding the original Darkbone sword. There was a thin, black membrane between the ribs of his chest. The white ribs were protruding and extremely eye-catching. Dean had never seen such a demonic body before. He looked at Monica, who had also entered the demonic body state. Her body was like a dexterous moth. Her skin had turned pink like the putty powder on the wall. Her eyes were blood red, although the outline of her cheeks was still beautiful, but no one could raise the slightest evil thoughts. After entering the demonic body, the original appearance had changed. Dean's heart was touched. Both Horny and Monica were handsome men and beautiful women. But after entering the demonic body, they became evil and horrible like monsters. People didn't dare to get close to them. This was the fundamental reason why nobles discriminated against warriors. At this time, the three people who entered the demonic body also looked at Dean. Baker coughed. "Brother Dean, what are you doing?" Dean's face was cold. The splitter in his hand melted as he quickly entered the demonic body state. At the same time, he dodged the punch of the quartz beast. The sand and dust on the ground splashed as his body soared into the air. His body was covered with spikes and sharp blades. It seemed as if it was a mixture of countless sharp blades. His hideous demonic body floated in the air. The three people were stunned. There was a bit of shock and dignity in their eyes. Chapter 903. Brother Dean, looking at your demonic body, you should be the attack type. How about we pin down the quartz beast? Let the two of them outflank it from the side and end the battle quickly. Barker took a deep look at the demonized Dean. His face showed a smile as he said in a loud voice. Dean turned his head. In fact, he didn't need to turn his head to see Barker. He could clearly see the changes in the expressions of the three. But in order to cover it up, he said, "All right, but can the two of them hurt this thing?" Horny smiled as he saw Dean agree. "Mr. Dean, don't worry. Leave it to us." Dean looked at him, but didn't say anything. Pinching the quartz beast from the front was undoubtedly the most dangerous. But in order to end the battle quickly, he didn't want to waste time. Moreover, Barker was also going to pin down the quartz beast. The strength of the Abyss was much stronger than Horny and Monica. There wouldn't be any danger if the two of them helped. In fact, he felt that there wouldn't be any problem if he fought the beast alone. He was able to easily avoid the previous attacks of the quartz beast without entering his demonic body. If the quartz beast maintained its speed, then he felt that he could get close to it and tear it apart. He had the confidence to do so. After all, the split blade was able to hurt the toes of the quartz beast. Moreover, the demonized blade was even sharper after entering the beast's body. However, he didn't want to expose too many of his fighting methods in the presence of Barker and the other two. After all, sooner or later, there would be a fierce battle after finding the ice worm. Roar! The quartz beast raised its fist and pounded its chest. It roared in anger as it rushed towards Dean and Barker. "I'll go up and you go down." Barker took the initiative to fly towards the shoulder of the quartz beast. The bone sword in his hand cut a deep groove. The petrified skin on the shoulder of the quartz beast seemed to feel pain. It roared and reached out to grab Barker. Dean didn't hesitate as he saw that Barker had attracted the attention of the quartz beast. He rushed toward its chest. Since Barker had taken the initiative to attack the upper body of the quartz beast and shared the main danger, Dean couldn't stay idle. He had to contribute a little bit of strength. Puff! The demonized blades on his body flung out, sweeping across the chest of the quartz magic beast. Immediately, a few wounds appeared, as if it had been torn by a giant claw. Dean was surprised. In order not to attract attention, he only used 30% of his strength. He was mentally prepared to leave only a shallow mark. If it was only a shallow mark, then the beast may not notice him. So he didn't have to bear the anger of the quartz beast. However, he did not expect that just 30% of his strength would create a wound that was not inferior to the one Buckle's bone sword had created. It was even wider and deeper. Dean smiled wryly in his heart. He saw that the quartz beast had stopped. It looked down and once again issued an angry roar. It gave up on chasing Baker and raised its hand to slap at Dean. Dean quickly dodged. At the same time, he paid attention to Baker's figure. He didn't want Baker to take advantage of the chaos to launch a sneak attack. At the same time, he was looking for an opportunity to attack Baker. If he could get rid of one of them, the pressure on him would be greatly reduced. Even if their relationship broke up, he wouldn't have to worry about losing his life. Brother Dean, good job. No wonder you have the courage to cross the abyss. Baker saw that Dean had lured away the quartz beast. He was shocked to see the cracks on the chest of the quartz magic beast. He didn't expect Dean's attack power to be so terrifying. Although he didn't use his full strength when attacking the quartz magic beast, but he had figured out the defense of the quartz magic beast. Even he had to use his full strength to deal considerable damage. Naturally, he wouldn't make a move easily. He had used less than 70% of his strength in the previous attack. But now it seemed that the injuries caused by Dean were much bigger than his. This showed that Dean's attack power wasn't inferior to his. Dean didn't pay attention to Baker's address as Brother Dean. He gently gasped a few times and quickly suppressed his breathing. On the surface, he tried to maintain a calm appearance. Sir Wall Lord is overpraising me. Let's deal with this thing first. Baker also knew that this wasn't the right time to talk. Otherwise, it would inevitably make others feel that he was too skillful. He glanced at Dean. He saw that Dean had stopped gasping for breath. His mouth slightly curved into a smile. He once again rushed towards the quartz magic beast. Roar! The quartz magic beast was ready to attack Dean. However, it saw Baker flying over. Previously, the human had injured its shoulder. The pain was unbearable. It didn't expect that the human would appear again. It roared and suddenly lifted its foot to stomp on the ground. Bang! The earth trembled and raised a lot of dust. Dean was about to wait for the dust to disperse before attacking again. But his eyelids suddenly jumped. He was aghast. He immediately dodged. Whoosh! A sharp rock pierced through his position. If he had dodged a little late, then he would have been injured, even if he didn't die. Golden light flashed in Dean's eyes. His eyes pierced through the dust and instantly saw the surrounding scene. He couldn't help but be aghast. He saw dozens of sharp thorns protruding from the ground. These thorns grew out of the soil. It seemed that they were controlled by the quartz magic beast. What kind of ability is this? Dean was startled. He couldn't figure it out. The next moment, he felt his body was suddenly enveloped by an inexplicable force. It pulled his body toward the quartz magic beast. At the same time, the quartz magic beast's chest changed. A sharp stone horn protruded out. Dean's body flew towards this stone horn. What kind of power is this? Dean's eyes widened. There was a trace of panic in his heart. But after all, he had experienced many life and death situations. He quickly reacted and flapped his wings to break free from the strange force. He once again opened the distance between him and the quartz magic beast. On the other side, Baker's body flew straight towards the stone horn protruding from the quartz magic beast's shoulder. Baker suddenly waved his sword, and the stone horn was cut off. Baker's feet stepped on the quartz magic beast's shoulder. He exerted his strength and flew in the opposite direction. Compared to Dean, who was fleeing, Baker seemed to be more skillful and at ease. He also took advantage of the momentum to counterattack the quartz magic beast. Dean looked thoughtful as he saw this scene. It seemed that the previous strange force was caused by the quartz magic beast. But what kind of ability was it to control the power from a distance? Was it mind control? Dean felt that it was unlikely. This kind of ability was too magical. He didn't dare to think about it. At this time, the ground suddenly fluctuated. Numerous stone awls flew out and shot towards the four people like raindrops. Dean was startled for a moment. Suddenly, he understood. But in his heart, he was very surprised. Could it be that the quartz magic beast had displayed the same ability? If so, then he had probably guessed what its ability was. Magnetic force. Through its own magnetic field, it was able to control the surrounding magnetic field and gravitational changes. Moreover, from the current attack, it seemed that the quartz magic beast could only control stones. The reason why it was able to pull Dean over was because it could control stones. But it was controlling its own stones. Through its own gravitational force, it was able to pull Dean over. Dean suddenly felt that this seemingly clumsy quartz magic beast's fighting skills were simply art. Whoosh! He waved his sword and smashed the stone awls under his feet. At the same time, he looked behind the quartz magic beast. Horny and Monica were close behind it. The outcome of the battle would soon be revealed. At this time, bang! A light sound came from the rear. It was the sound of a signal flare. Dean had heard it several times before, so he was very familiar with the sound. He used the horn on top of his head to look behind him. He suddenly saw more than a dozen red warning signals in the air. The distance from a signal flare was the place where the main forces were staying. Chapter 904. He saw a blazing and exuberant heat source appear in the center of the large army. This heat source was like a hill. It was 10 meters high and oval in shape. The fiery red heat source was in sharp contrast to the heat sources of the surrounding warriors. It was like the difference between crimson and light pink. Even some of the more brightly colored dominators had lighter colors than this heat source. The density of the heat source was a bit stronger than the quartz beast in front of him. Another abyssal monster? Dean's mouth slightly twitched. Although he knew that the Devil's Pit was extremely dangerous and it was very likely to encounter abyss monsters, but he didn't expect to encounter two abyss monsters in the same place. It must be known that most of the monsters had a territory. It was almost impossible to have a second monster of the same rank in the same territory. This involved the competition for survival resources in the territory. It was intolerable, but the facts in front of him told him that nothing was impossible. It's an abyss monster. On the other side, Horny exclaimed. Apparently, he had also noticed a movement in the rear. Damn, how can we be so unlucky? Let's get rid of this one together. Otherwise, it will be troublesome if the other one comes over. Buck roared as he raised his bone sword and rushed towards the quartz beast. Horny seemed to know that the situation was critical. He suddenly screamed and issued a harsh sound wave from his crow-like beak. His wings were full of thorns as he flapped them. His speed was twice as fast as before as he rushed towards the back of the quartz beast's neck. His ear-piercing scream immediately attracted the attention of the quartz beast, causing it to abandon its pursuit of Dean and Buck and turn around to pounce on Holland. Looking at the quartz beast that had suddenly turned around, Horny's expression changed. He wanted to stop his body, but after a pause, he once again rushed towards the quartz beast. This time, he was not in control of his own body, but was being pulled over. No! Horny roared as he frantically flapped his wings. But he still couldn't stop his body. The next moment, the quartz beast raised its palm to block the sun and fiercely swatted down from the top of Horny's head. Horny's face was full of shock and anger. Just as the stone palm was about to hit him, he suddenly stopped resisting and accelerated the flapping of his wings, instantly dodging the stone palm. His body was like a meteorite as he flew towards the quartz magic beast. This time, he could no longer stop. The quartz beast's reaction was also very fast. When Horny dodged its attack, sharp stone spikes quickly protruded from the surface of its chest. They were incomparably thick and could easily pierce through Horny. "Save me!" Horny couldn't help but shout. There was a trace of panic in his voice. However, Monica, who was the closest to him, was also more than 20 meters away from him. There was no time for her to help. All of this happened in a millisecond. Just as they were about to collide, Horny suddenly tilted his body and spread his four wings, changing the trajectory of the wind. His body flew in an upward arc, which allowed him to avoid the stone spikes on the chest of the quartz monster. But his destination was the mouth of the quartz monster. The quartz monster seemed to be clumsy, but its reaction was very fast. Just as Horny was about to fly over, it suddenly opened its bloody mouth and made a strange, buzzing sound. The next moment, Horny had no time to stop, so he went straight into the mouth of the quartz monster and was swallowed. Dean's pupil shrank. Dean's pupil shrank. Was it eaten like this? Horny was a powerhouse of the abyss. How could he be so vulnerable? No, it wasn't that he was weak, but the quartz monster was too strong. "Beast, let go of me!" With a roar, Buck slashed the shoulder of the quartz monster. He had just arrived when he saw that Horny had been swallowed. At this moment, his face was full of resentment. If he had arrived half a second earlier, he would have been able to snatch Horny from the mouth of the quartz monster. There was a half-meter deep stone mark on the shoulder of the quartz monster. There was no blood, but it seemed to feel the pain. It issued a dull roar and swung its hands towards Buck. Buck didn't choose to resist. Comparing strength with the quartz monster was undoubtedly a weak point. He stepped on the shoulder of the quartz monster and borrowed the force to retreat. But just as he was flying halfway, his speed suddenly slowed down. It was as if he had suddenly fallen into a swamp. Buck's face changed greatly. He burst out with all his strength to flap his wings to break free from the binding force. But suddenly his eyes darkened as two huge fists smashed down on him. Bang! Buck's body was like a cannonball that smashed into the ground under the feet of the quartz monster. The ground shook and a lot of dust splashed up. Buck's body was smashed more than 10 meters into the ground. It could be seen how terrifying the power of the punch was. Dean saw Buck's body through his X-ray vision. He wasn't dead, but 4 or 5 ribs on his chest were broken. He was dying. In the blink of an eye, one was swallowed by the abyss. It was unknown whether he was alive or dead, but the other was seriously injured. All of this happened so fast that Dean couldn't believe it. He had a feeling that it was unreal, although he knew that monsters were much stronger when fighting with humans of the same level. But he didn't expect the difference to be so big. Roar! The quartz monster roared in anger. It lifted its foot and stomped on the place where Buck was buried. The ground shrank and squeezed Buck so much that he spat out a mouthful of blood. At this moment, Monica, who was like a white moth, suddenly appeared behind the quartz magical beast. The slender silver sword in her hand stabbed towards the quartz magical beast's head. With a whoosh, the silver sword sank into the quartz magical beast's head. When Monica tried to pull her sword back, she discovered that she couldn't move it. Her face slightly changed. She decisively abandoned the sword and quickly said to Dean, "Your attack is stronger than me. I will contain it while you attack. Let's end this quickly." She lightly flew towards the front of the quartz monster. The white skin on the surface of her hand squirmed and quickly formed a bow. She took out a golden arrow from the middle of the armor. This arrow was originally part of the armor. Dean didn't know that it could be disassembled until now. Monica aimed at the eyes of the quartz monster and shot the arrow. The eye sockets of the quartz monster were 2 black holes. The arrow went straight into the eye sockets. The quartz monster suddenly roared in anger and pain. It covered its eyes with one hand and cried out a few times in pain. It immediately chased after Monica. Monica's figure fluttered like a nimble butterfly. She dodged the giant palm of the quartz monster. It seemed light, but extremely dangerous. Dean didn't think about the crisis anymore. He couldn't continue to hide his strength. Otherwise, he would have to wait for the other abyss monster to come over. He might have to expose more cards in order to solve the problem. Whoosh! Dean rushed over from the side. This was the first time he used his full strength since he became an abyss monster. His body was like an afterimage. He was so fast that he couldn't adapt to it. The quartz monster seemed to be in a violent rage. It didn't pay attention to Dean's approach. Dean quickly caught up with it from the side. It didn't take him much effort. He flew to the side of the neck of the quartz monster. His eyes flashed as he swung the 4 sharpest blades on his back with all his strength. Puff! Puff! The neck of the quartz monster was cut in an instant. The sharp blade on his back was 2 meters long and had cut across his body, creating a wound that was about 6 meters long. It had sliced through half of the quartz magical beast's neck. If he had been a little closer, he might have been able to cut off its head. The 4 sharp blades made a huge wound. Only 1/3 of the neck of the quartz monster was left. Dean was surprised for a moment, but quickly lifted his foot and kicked. This kick landed on the side of the beast's face. With a bang, the remaining stone on the beast's neck snapped, unable to withstand the force of this kick. Its huge head fell to the ground like a huge boulder, creating several deep holes in the ground. After rolling a few times, it stopped moving. As for the headless beast, it ran forward a few steps before losing its balance and falling forward. Dust rose. The huge quartz monster crawled on the ground and didn't move again. Dean used his X-ray vision to look at it. He saw that the heat source was quickly dissipating and the concentration was rapidly weakening. It was the appearance of death. Chapter 905. Monica was also in disbelief. She was completely dumbfounded when the head of the quartz monster fell to the ground. This was a quartz monster. It was famous for its terrifying defense. How could its head be so easily cut off by Dean? She couldn't believe it, but the giant quartz monster's head had fallen right in front of her. She had no choice but to believe it. This quartz monster's intelligence was lower than the average abyssal monsters. It simply didn't know how to fake its death and disguise itself. Moreover, through her own abilities, she could tell that this quartz monster was truly dead. Gotcha! Barkle crawled out of the soil, and the first thing he saw was the place where the quartz beast's head had fallen. When he saw the head clearly, a trace of shock flashed across his eyes. He didn't expect his senses to be right. It was no wonder that the density of the soil that the quartz beast had gathered earlier had suddenly stopped. He turned his head and looked at Dean, who was stunned in place. His eyes flickered and soon returned to normal. He sat on the ground, gasping for breath, and asked, "Did you too kill him?" Monica looked at him and curled her lips. She knew a little bit about Buck's ability. She didn't believe that he didn't know anything about the outside world during the time he was in the underground. However, she was too lazy to expose him. She didn't want to make an enemy out of him. She could only say, "It has nothing to do with me. Mr. Dean solved it by himself. If I knew that Mr. Dean was so powerful, then we wouldn't have spent so much effort." Dean came back to his senses as he heard the conversation between the two. He glanced at Baker's broken ribs. There were some doubts in his heart, but he didn't show it. He only said, "I didn't expect it to be so careless. Thanks to Miss Monica, who attracted its attention. Otherwise, I wouldn't have found the opportunity to attack its weakness and kill it. Mr. Dean is modest. It's nothing. I'm just telling the truth." Buck didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he saw the two of them being modest. Don't shirk your responsibility. In any case, it was you two who killed it. Fortunately, you acted in time. Otherwise, I would have suffered a big loss. The Wall Lord is strong. You would have killed it sooner or later, even without us," Dean said in a comforting tone. Barker smiled and shook his head, but didn't say anything. He was analyzing Dean's words in his mind. Although he didn't directly see what happened outside, but he had a vague perception of the general situation. Dean was able to kill the quartz beast in one blow, so his strength was much stronger than he had expected. Moreover, the attack power was extremely terrifying. Otherwise, even if he used all of his strength, he wouldn't be able to cut off the head of the quartz beast. It was estimated that the sword would get stuck in the middle. From this, it could be seen that Dean's magic marks should be an extremely strong attack type. As he analyzed Dean's strength, Dean was also pondering in his heart. He felt that it was inconceivable before, but not because he felt that he had killed the quartz beast so easily. He felt that he wasn't afraid of the quartz beast from the beginning to the end. The speed of the quartz beast's attack and pursuit, as well as its power, didn't seem to be terrible to him. He felt that he could do the same. The reason why he was surprised was that he did not expect Horny and Barkle to be defeated by this thing. They were defeated so quickly that the quartz magic beast that had defeated two people in a row instantly rose a few notches in his heart, forcing him to go all out. The result was that it was so easy to kill it. He suspected that Barkle was deliberately pretending to be injured. This way, he didn't have to rush to the front, and, at the same time, he and Monica, who weren't injured, could deal with the quartz monster and take the opportunity to observe their strength. Secondly, another abyss-level monster had appeared in the distance. If they were injured, then the heavy responsibility of dealing with that monster would naturally fall on them. However, he saw that Buck's injury was very serious. It would be too ruthless if he pretended to be injured. Dean thought for a moment. He felt that Buck's injury was half true and half false. In any case, his injury forced him to expose his strength. If he was pretending, then he would admit it. He couldn't be careless against these abyss-level masters. Holland should still be in its stomach. I don't know if he has digested it or not. Let's find him first. Buck said to Monica. Monica shook her head. I can't feel its existence. It's a disaster. Let's deal with that one first. I don't know how many people will be killed. Buck slightly frowned, but what she said was reasonable. He immediately looked at Dean. What do you think? Let's go and help first. Dean rushed out. He didn't stop since he had decided. Wait for us. Buck and Monica immediately caught up. Dean held Aisha in his arms and rushed to the hunting team. As he approached, he saw the shape of the monster that was surrounded by many members of the hunting team. It was a mud-like monster. Its whole body was wriggling with mud. It was about 14 or 15 meters high, like a small building. It had no head, but the mud at the top seemed to be its head. There were no facial features on it. Mud tentacles kept extending from its body and swept into the crowd. Those who couldn't escape in time were pulled back into the mud and sank into it. Then a few small bubbles appeared on the surface of the mud, and then there was no sound from it. A golden light flashed in Dean's eyes. Through his X-ray vision, he saw that the body of the person who was pulled into the monster's body was quickly pierced by the mud. The next moment, the body was torn apart, crushed by the mud, turned into blood, and mixed with the mud. After a while, the blood seemed to be absorbed by the mud and completely disappeared. The size of the mud-like monster was faintly bigger. The change was very small, but Dean noticed it. Rotten mud ghost. Buck took a deep breath. His face was a bit ugly. Dean saw that Buck recognized it and asked, "What do you mean?" "This thing is indeed an abyssal magical creature, and it's one that's very difficult to deal with. Its hunting level isn't fixed. The magical creature catalog's evaluation is based on its size and height. If it's 12 meters tall, its hunting level is 305. If it's 13 meters tall, its hunting level is 305. That's 10 levels per meter. I think it's at least 14 meters tall. Its hunting level isn't any lower than the quartz beast from before." Dean frowned as he felt that it was a bit tricky. The rotten mud ghost was different from the quartz monster. The quartz monster had a hard shell. Dean wasn't afraid of encountering a defensive monster. After all, the defense would be broken unless his physical strength was exhausted. However, the body of the rotten mud ghost was soft and sticky. He didn't need to attack to know that it was his enemy. An extremely sharp blade could cut through hardness, but couldn't cut through water. Without the advantage of the sharp blade, the rotten mud ghost was 10 times stronger than the quartz monster. He may not be able to deal with it. I should have thought of it. The quartz monster feeds on stones. It often eats extremely precious ores. The rotten mud ghost likes the feces of the quartz monster the most. It is a great tonic for it. No wonder it appeared here. Buck was a bit annoyed. If I knew it would be like this, I would have directly retreated. Dean's eyes flashed as he said, "It's meaningless to say these things now. I don't think I can help you with this thing. I've overdrawn my physical strength after killing the quartz beast. You have seen that I'm good at attacking. But although my attack is strong, it has no effect on this thing. Look at other people's arrows. They fell into it and then bounced out. Ordinary sword wounds are useless against it." Chapter 906. All right, Dean nodded. He knew that they wouldn't be willing to fight seriously if they didn't make a move. While they were talking, more than a dozen people in the hunting group died one after another. Some were killed by the mud that splashed out from the mud ghost body. Some were killed by the mud that turned into spikes. And some were directly pulled into its mud-like body and crushed to death. Dean, Barker, and Monica quickly rushed forward. Monica went to the rear of the carrion ghost. Fine particles slowly floated out of her moth-like, snow-white body. It seemed that there was something inside her body. Dean and Barker rushed to the front of the carrion ghost. Barker took the lead and stabbed the carrion ghost with his bone sword. The next moment, the carrion ghost's arm was about to be swallowed by the carrion ghost's bone sword. Baker's face changed. He pulled out the bone sword and cut the mud. However, the wound healed instantly. It was useless. Dean and Baker rushed in front of the mud ghost. Dean also stabbed into the mud. He felt that it was easy to stab into the mud, but when he wanted to pull it out, he felt that there seemed to be a corrosive force in the mud. It was digesting his sharp limbs, and the speed of digestion was very fast. Dean was shocked. He quickly pulled out the blade, but saw that the color of the blade was mottled. It seemed that the color was fading unevenly. Physical damage is useless. Baker retreated to Dean's side. "I remember that there are a few people in the hunting group who have magic marks. Let them attack. Maybe they can cause some damage. We will cover for them." Dean nodded slightly as he thought about the attack of the supplicant's magic mark. At this moment, the supplicant's magic mark was much more useful than a splitter. After all, it was the #1 legendary monster here. However, the cost of replacing the magic mark was huge. He needed to absorb the god's marrows and the ice worm to restore his current strength. he might not even be able to restore his current strength. Therefore, he needed to be careful when choosing the magic mark. Once he chose it, it would be difficult to replace it as he didn't have enough resources. Baker came to the edge of the encirclement. He called the 3 people with magic marks and told them his plan. Then he asked Dean to continue to rush forward. Although their attacks were ineffective, they could at least attract the attention of the sludge ghosts. Dean and Barker went forward to contain and interfere with the sludge ghost. The 3 Lord of Magic marks sneakily followed behind. They aimed at the opportunity and immediately approached the sludge ghost. Dark demonized claws patted the mud body of the sludge ghost. The place where the claws were patted slightly collapsed. The color turned black as if it was corroded. Before Dean and Baker could rejoice, the mud that had sunken quickly gushed out and restored to its original state. At the same time, several spikes protruded from the mud and shot toward the 3 rulers. Puff! One of the sovereigns couldn't react in time, and a mud spear pierced through his throat, killing him on the spot. The other 2 fled in panic, not even daring to breathe loudly. Dean's face slightly changed. The carrion ghost's hunting level was only 10 levels higher than the quartz beast, but it was several times more difficult to deal with it. If he encountered it alone, he could only escape. He was completely helpless against this thing, which made him see his weakness. Goo goo goo. Suddenly, a roar that sounded like a bucket of water came from the mud-like body. It was filled with extreme anger. Dean was stunned for a moment. He saw a figure appear behind the carrion ghost. It was Monica, but at this moment, her whole body was snow white. When her figure fluttered, white powder constantly drifted down. It was like snowflakes, but finer and more deadly than snowflakes. The white powder fell on the carrion ghost's body, and the place that was touched quickly hardened, no longer soft and wriggling. When the white powder sprinkled on more than half of its upper body, Monica stabbed the silver sword in her hand. Crack! The mud-like body suddenly broke like a rock. Dean and Barker looked at each other. They didn't miss this rare opportunity. They quickly rushed to the place where the carrion ghost was covered by the white powder. Crack! The hardened upper body of the carrion ghost was completely twisted. After the upper body was smashed, the lower body of the carrion ghost slowly shrank. It drilled into the ground, ready to escape. Dean waved the sharp sword to cut the ground, wanting to keep the carrion ghost. But the carrion ghost's drilling speed was extremely fast, like a fish in the water. It was extremely flexible. Most likely, the carrion ghost had suddenly drilled out from the ground. Barker and Monica tried to keep the carrion ghost, but like Dean, both of them failed. After the carrion ghost drilled into the ground and escaped, the 3 of them were exhausted. Barker sat on the ground, gasping for breath. He took out medicine from his backpack and bandaged himself. At this moment, he didn't have the slightest dignity of a wall lord. Monica released the Reaper's body, and her body returned to the appearance of a human beauty. But her face and skin were a little pale. She looked at Dean, but didn't say anything. She went to the side and sat quietly to rest. Dean also released the Reaper's body. The battle didn't last long, so he didn't consume a lot of energy. It was easy for him to kill the quartz monster, although the carrion ghost was difficult to deal with, but he didn't spend much effort. Moreover, he found that the carrion ghost seemed to be the same as the carrion ghost. If its body wasn't as soft as mud, it wouldn't be difficult for him to kill the carrion ghost. He found that the attack speed of the carrion ghost wasn't fast. He was able to dodge easily. Even when he dodged Monica's white powder, the carrion ghost seemed to be a bit slow. He didn't know whether it was because the carrion ghost was slow or because its physique was higher than the average abyss monster. Other members of the hunting group were cleaning up the battlefield while Dean was analyzing the situation. They were helping the injured to heal and burying the remaining limbs and corpses on the ground. Some people proposed to cremate the corpses on the spot. This was the custom of the hunters outside the giant wall. After all, it wouldn't take long for the corpses to be picked up and eaten by a monster with a keen sense of smell. This proposal was rejected. Some people thought that the previous movement was too big. If they continue to stay here to cremate the corpses, it would be difficult to guarantee that it wouldn't attract other monsters. Moreover, the smell of the cremation process would be stronger and more likely to attract monsters. Moreover, although burying the corpses on the spot might fall into the belly of the beast, but for the living it could be used as bait to attract monsters. After a few discussions, someone looked for Barker to make a decision. Chapter 9:07. Dean looked at Holland and saw that his body was covered with sticky yellow liquid. It was disgusting. It seemed to be the digestive fluid from the body of the quartz monster. He said, "You didn't die?" Dean had used his X-ray vision before. Unfortunately, he couldn't penetrate the body of the quartz monster. But he didn't see any reaction from Holland's heat source. He thought that something really happened to him. "Your luck is good. The battle has just ended and you have come." Monica glanced at Holiday, not surprised that he was still alive, and said with a slight sarcasm. Holland smiled. "I was almost digested. Fortunately, you killed that thing in time. The three of you are my benefactors. This seems to be a rotten ghost. Is it dead?" "It just died," Barkley replied. He was in no mood to pay attention to him. Dean saw that Monica and Barkley weren't surprised that Holland survived. It seemed that he had underestimated the shamelessness of the abyss. Now it seemed that Holland had deliberately let the quartz monster eat him. Even if he didn't kill the quartz monster, he estimated that he wouldn't have an accident. Instead, he could take the opportunity to hide inside the body of the quartz monster and watch how they fight. After all, they lost one person. The pressure on the remaining three would be greater. Naturally, they couldn't hide their strength. Thinking of this, he glanced at Barkley. As a wall lord, he was able to suppress Monica and Holland. Barkley's ability should be a bit stronger than them, but he couldn't see how powerful he was from the previous performance. In this way, it was he and Monica who had been exposed more in this battle. However, Barker and Horny might have already known what Monica had exposed, so there was no need to hide it. From the beginning to the end, he was the one who had suffered the most. Let's take a break and leave as soon as possible. The quartz monster is dead. There is no master in this territory. Most of the monsters will invade. It's not good to stay here for a long time. Barker bandaged the wound on his chest, patted his butt, stood up, and said to Horany, "Let your people count the losses. Many people died earlier, and we're going to face the Arctic frost dragon next. We can't afford any more losses." At the end of his sentence, there was a hint of meaning in his words. However, Horny did not seem to understand. He nodded and said, "It's time to go. You guys rest first. I'll open the way." Dean was not in the mood to wrangle, so he sat down to rest. A moment later, Horany reorganized the members of the hunting team and did a head count. In just a few minutes, the Rotten Mud Ghost had killed 4 Dominators, 9 Demon Generals, and more than 70 Pioneers. Now, there were only about 360 people left. After reorganizing the hunting group, Horny led his men to open the way. The area of the magic pit was very large, much larger than the other areas outside. According to Horny, it was about the size of 4 giant walls. It could easily accommodate hundreds of millions of people. Dean associated this concept with a sunken island country. He knew the scope of the Devil's Pit. Although the island country had a population of more than 100 million people, but the land area was very large. In fact, it could accommodate more people. The Devil's Pit was about half the size of the island country. They were still at the edge of the Devil's Pit. The ice lake was close to the central area. It was a long way. After half a day of travel, they encountered some Dominator-level monsters. Horny took the initiative to lead the team to kill them. There were not many warriors of the hunting group. After leaving the territory of the quartz monster, they encountered 2 Abyss-level monsters. However, Monica sensed them in advance and avoided them. The sky was getting dark. Everyone was resting in a canyon. The whistling wind was like a monster's grin. It made people feel uneasy. In this nervous mood, everyone was holding their weapons and sleeping. They would wake up at any time. Holland and Monica were responsible for the night watch. Originally, Holland wanted to be polite, but he didn't expect Dean and Barkley to be polite. They immediately agreed. But he also knew that they were angry at him for avoiding the fight during the day, so he didn't care about anything. Moreover, even if he was asked to sleep, he didn't dare to sleep. From the battle with the quartz monster during the day, he guessed that Dean's magic mark should be a monster that was very good at fighting. It was not good at perception. It would be better to let a ruler guard the night instead of Dean. The night outside the giant wall was always long. The sound of monsters howling could be heard from time to time. Many of the more ferocious monsters liked to appear at night and hunt other monsters. The difficulty of survival was not only reflected in Dean and the other hunters. For other weaker monsters, the night was also a disaster. Most of the monsters returned to their nests at dusk. No matter how far away they were from their nests, they would rush back. The night passed quickly. Along the way, a few pioneers and a dominator monsters found the canyon. But before they could attack, they were quietly killed by Horny and Monica, who were on night watch, without causing much of a commotion. When the dawn came, the dark world seemed to glow with hope again. After a night of hiding and shivering monsters, the monsters left their nests to look for their prey. Dean and the others also ate dry food, replenished water, and set off again. Under the leadership of Horny, everyone moved toward the ice lake in the depths of the Devil's Pit. With Monica, a master of perception, they avoided a lot of risks along the way. Nevertheless, they still encountered a lot of pioneer-level monsters in broad daylight. As for the weaker monsters, they would encounter them from time to time, but they were killed by the warriors of the hunting group. On the way, Dean borrowed a map from Horny and looked at it. When Horny pointed out their location on the map and the ice lake, Dean knew that they were still a long way from the ice lake. It would take at least 2 or 3 days. Marching for 2 or 3 days in the Devil's Pit was no less than suicide. Dean looked around at the warriors who were sitting on the ground to rest and massage their shoulders. There was a bit of pity in his heart. There weren't many people here who could go back alive. However, they still had hope. They thought that as long as there were several Abyss warriors, nothing would happen to them. Even if something happened, they would be the lucky ones to survive. But he knew that when they reached the ice lake, they would be the first batch of cannon fodder to rush to the front. They would wear down the power of the ice dragon and reduce the possibility of danger. Even if everyone was sacrificed, they wouldn't care, because after getting the ice worm, Baker and the others would return to the giant wall at the fastest speed. They wouldn't stay in the Devil's Pit for a long time. After all, even the Abyss could die here. Regrettably, only he, who had reached the Abyss, could understand this. Others might have guessed it, but they could only sadly accept their fate or humble themselves with a trace of hope, begging for mercy. But the strong never show mercy. 2 days passed. Dean and Honeylay led the remaining 300 warriors of the hunting group to the ice forest outside the ice lake. In the past 2 days, they encountered 3 abyssal monsters. Although Monica and several other dominators and generals with strong perception were exploring the way, they still couldn't find the 3 abyssal monsters with strong lurking ability. The battle was inevitable. Fortunately, the abyssal monster was alone this time. Under the siege of several people, they spent a lot of effort to solve it. Dean was relatively low-key in the following battles. At the same time, he took the opportunity to observe the magic marks of Honeylay and the other 2. He even deliberately exposed flaws in the battle to give the abyssal monsters the opportunity to attack. In his observation, Honeylay was good at using poison. At the same time, he had a strong perception ability. He could release poison from his mouth and the needles in his wings. The venom was extremely corrosive and toxic. It could easily corrode metal and rocks. One of the abyssal monsters was poisoned by Honeylay. Its body quickly decayed and its flesh peeled off. The scene was extremely cruel. In addition to hardening things into snow-white powder, Monica's magic marks could also bewitch the enemy and make them absent-minded. Dean deliberately made a mistake. He forced Monica to use this trick when the abyssal monster drilled out of the encirclement. Although it only stunned the abyssal monster for a moment, Dean still saw it. This made him pay special attention. This kind of ability was the most difficult to deal with. Dean didn't see much of Baker's ability. He only knew that Baker's bones healed quickly. This also convinced him that Baker deliberately injured himself in the previous battle. Moreover, he pretended to bandage his wounds. It was completely deceiving him. As Dean analyzed the abilities of the three in his mind, the three also set an impression of Dean's ability. Strong attack, sharp. No matter how strong the defense of the abyssal monster was, it was as fragile as a piece of paper under Dean's sharp blade. They tried their best to barely cause damage, but Dean's sharp blade could cut through them. This made the three quite afraid. Although they had their own abilities, and Dean may not be their opponent in a sneak attack, but in a head-on confrontation, Dean's ability was the most terrible. They couldn't compete with him at all. Even their weapons would be cut off. If Dean's fighting skills were high, coupled with this ability, he was simply a god of death. However, the three were glad that Dean's ability seemed to be relatively extreme. In addition to the sharp attack, he didn't show any other ability. Even his perception was very weak. While they were getting to know each other, they arrived at the snowy forest outside the frozen lake. It was May, and summer had just arrived, but it was still extremely cold here. The branches of the forest were covered in ice shards. Dean was surprised as he saw the snowy weather. This kind of thing was completely unscientific. It was not the North Pole, where it was freezing in the summer. The climate outside the snow forest was relatively hot, but inside the forest it was like entering another world. The reason why the North Pole was frozen all year round was because it was far from the sun, but here it was not the case. Be careful. The dragon may not always stay in the ice lake. It may come to this forest to look for food. Horny reminded the hunting group. Monica looked at the snowy forest curiously and said, "Is the influence of the Arctic frost dragon so big that even this place is frozen?" This dragon has lived here for a long time. It is said that it has lived here for 40 or 50 years. Barkle knew more. He said in a low voice, "Because of it, the surrounding monsters have all been infected with a similar ice constitution. These monsters live in this forest, which is why the temperature here is so low. Be careful." Monica suddenly understood. Dean was surprised. Had lived here for 40 or 50 years. It was almost impossible to dominate a territory outside the giant wall for 40 or 50 years. Not to mention, this was the Abyss. The ultra-high radiation in the Abyss was constantly accelerating the mutation of the monsters. Every day, there would be a new overlord being born. The resources were limited. The new overlords would compete with the old overlords for territory. The loser would be swallowed. This was the law of survival outside the giant wall. How strong was this Arctic dragon to be able to guard this place for 40 or 50 years? Chapter 908. Dean made up his mind to retreat immediately if the situation was not good. Although the ice worm was precious and the opportunity was hard to come by, but as long as there was life, there was hope. At this time, Holland had organized the first batch of cannon fodder squads. They were led by 2 dominators and took the lead to enter the ice forest. How far is the distance from the forest to the ice lake? Dean asked Holland. Holland looked at the forest in front of them. It's not far if we go in a straight line. It's less than 80 miles. But if we encounter some troublesome things and need to take a detour, then it will be very troublesome. 80 miles for Dean and others wasn't much different from 800 meters in the eyes of ordinary people. But if there were snakes and dogs on the way, then most people wouldn't think that the road was short. Barker said, "Try not to take a detour. It's too dangerous to take a detour in this forest. It's best to go through as soon as possible." Holland nodded. "I know. Can't we burn the forest?" Dean asked. The 3 of them were startled and looked at Dean strangely. How violent was his character to think of such a thing? "It's impossible to burn the forest with fire." Holland explained to Dean, "Fire is the nemesis of all things, but the temperature in the forest is low, and there are a lot of monsters with ice physique. It's almost impossible to ignite the whole forest unless we bring a lot of tarpaulins. Even if we burn the forest, the monsters will rush out, and it will be more dangerous for us." "That's true." Duddy nodded. He felt that this method was not appropriate. What Horny said was right. 10 minutes later, the exploration team that went deep into the forest sent back a signal that they could come in. Holland immediately organized the 2nd to 5th cannon fodder squads to enter. The 4 of them walked in the middle of the team. The rest of the warriors of the hunting group were responsible for the rear. They formed a long snake team to move forward. After coming to the forest, Dean put away his previous casual attitude and let Aisha follow him closely. He was ready to use the demonization to deal with the surprise attack. At the same time, his eyes flashed with a touch of dark gold from time to time. He used his X-ray vision to observe the surrounding environment. It didn't take long for the sound of fighting to come from the front. Everyone was shocked. Monica looked ahead and calmly said, "Don't worry, it's not the Abyss." Several hunting groups around them were relieved. They felt cold sweat on their backs. Compared to the happy days inside the giant wall, where there were beautiful women and fragrant wine in their hands, this place was simply a difficult hell. This is the territory of the Arctic frost dragon. There shouldn't be a second Abyss dragon. Everyone, be careful and don't get ambushed by other monsters. Everyone listened to him, and their hearts were filled with confidence. Soon, the team moved faster. From time to time, there were sounds of fighting. Dean followed the team and came to the place where the sounds were coming from. He saw several bloody corpses on the ground, as well as 2 corpses of monsters that had been split into 2 halves. The monster's hair was dark blue and exuded a very heavy chill. Dean was speechless. An ice dragon was able to transform all the monsters in the territory into ice physique. This ability was beyond his imagination. Half an hour later, the group passed through the snowy forest, leaving behind the corpses of a dozen companions and a number of monsters. After coming out of the forest, they saw a vast lake not far away. The lake was quiet and the water was clear. Dudeen looked at the lake and saw that it was frozen. "Get ready to draw the old dragon out." Horny looked at the huge ice lake and said. Barkle had a grave look in his eyes as he said coldly, "Let me say this first. When we attack later, if anyone tries to play tricks and doesn't go all out, don't blame me for being merciless." Horny's face slightly changed. "Naturally, Wall Lord, please rest assured." "Yes," Dean immediately said. "There are some things that everyone is well aware of. I don't want to say it too clearly. The Arctic dragon is not an ordinary Abyss. If anyone tries to sneak attack me from the back, then I'll leave. I don't want the ice worm anymore." The 3 frowned but didn't say anything. Dean didn't pay attention to them. His words were just a warning. If the enemy wanted to sneak attack or deliberately save energy, he would be helpless. At this time, the one who was honest would suffer a loss. Dean looked at the frozen lake and used the heat source to observe. He didn't see any heat source. He looked at the 3. "I'll go up and have a look." "Okay." Horny nodded and continued to command the others. Dean flew to a height of 20 or 30 meters and looked down. The frozen lake was very big. There was no wind or snow on the frozen lake, so it was as transparent as a mirror. He could see the dark green water at the bottom of the lake. I don't know if there are other fish monsters at the bottom of the lake. If not, what does it eat? The biggest problem of all life was eating and drinking, especially for some large monsters. In order to forage for food, they had to walk on the road of hunting or migration. They even had to compete with difficult hunters for food or challenge the hegemons of other territories. Once injured, the difficulty of foraging would increase and they would starve. The more hungry they were, the more powerless they would be. And the more hungry they would be, the more powerless they would be. And the more they would be injured, the more powerless they would be. In the world outside the giant wall, there were countless monsters dying every day. Many of these monsters were incomparably fierce. From the current situation, it was obvious that the Arctic dragon was an amphibious monster. It could even fly. Dean patrolled around the lake and soon found messy claw marks. It should be left by the Arctic dragon when it came ashore to forage for food. In addition to the claw marks, he also saw some potholes and traces of fighting. He also saw half of a broken spear inserted in the side of a tree near the forest. It was covered by grass. If he didn't look down from the sky and had good eyesight, he wouldn't be able to see it. Were there humans who fought here? Dean's eyes moved, but he didn't think much about it. The ice lake was recorded on the map in Royal's hands. Naturally, it was explored by humans. He was about to land, but at this moment, at the bottom of the frozen lake, a shadow suddenly swayed. Dean thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. A few seconds later, another huge shadow swayed, like a long snake. Dean's eyelids twitched. Was it the Arctic dragon? Was it at the bottom of the lake? He continued to stare at the lake for a moment. The shadow flashed again. It was a long strip. It was estimated to be more than 10 meters long. But it went back to the bottom of the lake, so he couldn't see it clearly. He watched for a moment, but the shadow did not appear again. He landed and looked at the warriors of the hunting group who had arranged themselves by the lake. He said to Horny and the other two, "Should we lure it out now? Everyone is in position." "Let's start," Holly said. Dean frowned. "Should we wait for the Arctic dragon to come out to forage for food?" Wait for it to forage for food? The three of them weren't rookies, so they knew what Dadian meant. Barker thought for a moment. When it forages, it means that it is hungry and its physical strength is the weakest. Naturally, it is the best time to make a move. However, we don't know how often it eats. These cold-blooded creatures often eat for half a month at a time. We can't wait that long for it to digest. Dean saw that they didn't know the eating pattern of the Arctic dragon. He said, "Let's get ready. I don't know if it is at the bottom of the lake or out to forage for food." Monica frowned. "If it is not at the bottom of the lake, then it will be alarmed by us. I just saw a shadow at the bottom of the lake. I don't know if it is the Arctic dragon or not, but I don't think there are any other monsters at the bottom of the lake," Dean said. Chapter 909. Brother Dew, now that things have come to this, shouldn't your female companion lend a hand? Barker looked at Aisha, who was next to Dean. Dean hadn't let Aisha make a move along the way. They wanted to test Aisha's strength, but they were very clear that this female companion was a genuine corpse king. Her pure black pupils and thick corpse energy were by no means a disguise. How terrifying a corpse king controlled and cultivated by human beings was dependent on how crazy Dean was. From Dean's several talks and moves, they knew that this young man was not an ordinary person. The female companion controlled by him might be much stronger than him. Dean's face turned cold as he heard Barker's words. "I have my own judgment on whether I should let her make a move or not." "Brother Dew, you can't say that. This old dragon isn't an ordinary abyss. If we don't unite now, we may not be able to defeat it. Besides, we've all contributed. Shouldn't you show us something too?" Horny also said. "That's right." Dean narrowed his eyes. Did the two want to force him? However, their calculations were obviously wrong. He wouldn't fall for it. "What do you want me to show? Didn't I make a move along the way? Don't forget who saved your life. Don't forget who killed the quartz beast." Horny's face stiffened. He coughed and looked at Monica and Barker. His meaning was obvious. "I have nothing to say. I can only leave it to you. Brother Dew, we know that you've put in a lot of effort as well. However, with just the four of us, we're the only ones who can deal with the extreme ice frost dragon. We've all put in a lot of effort for the sake of the extreme ice worm. Please understand," Baku advised. Dean couldn't help but laugh. "What? My woman is an abyss, so I have to make a move? Am I not qualified to get a piece of the pie? If we were to join hands, then we would have the strength of 2 abyss levels. In that case, why do I need to share with the 3 of you? Can you come up with the strength of 2 abyss levels? To put it bluntly, I alone am qualified to share the pie. Don't tell me that the information about the ice worm belongs to you. No one knows about it. Since it has been made public, then it is meaningless." The faces of the 3 changed. They didn't expect Dean to turn hostile. But the 3 of them were experienced people, so they didn't care about Dean's attitude. Barker looked at Royal and pondered for a moment. "If that's the case, then Brother Dean should ask your woman to help in case of crisis. It shouldn't be too much, right?" Dadian indifferently said, "Of course. But I won't help if any of you are lazy. This isn't a joke. I'll be the first to withdraw if the situation goes wrong. It's best to assign tasks to each of us. We'll work together to kill the ice dragon, and then we'll discuss how to divide the ice worm. What do you think?" I think so. Monica nodded. As for the discussion that Dean had mentioned, she certainly knew what kind of discussion it was. Horny and Barker also agreed. They didn't force Dean to let Aisha take action. Horny said, "I will draw out the old dragon. The three of you will be responsible for blocking it. Although it is difficult to draw it out, but we still need to rely on your participation in the subsequent battle." Barker said he wouldn't be polite with Horny. Now was a critical moment, so he didn't dare to be arrogant. Horny frowned and looked unhappy, but in his heart he knew that he wouldn't let it go so easily. They discussed for a moment and finally decided on a plan. They assigned their respective tasks and responsibilities. Horny entered the demonic state after everything was ready. He flew up like a black crow and hovered in the air for a moment. Suddenly he whispered, "I see it." He swooped down and raised his hand to pull the bow and arrow borrowed from the general. He aimed at the tranquil lake and shot the arrow. Whoosh! The arrow pierced through the lake and pierced into the lake. Although the penetrating power of the arrow was strong, the resistance of the water was stronger. Soon there was no sound. Dean and the others who were lying in ambush at the edge of the forest held their breath. Suddenly, a roar resounded from the ice lake and resounded for hundreds of miles. Bang! 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 The ice on the surface of the lake was completely cracked. It was like a broken mirror that fell to the ground. A black shadow was thrown out from the lake and rolled towards Horny in the air. Horny was shocked and hurriedly dodged. The black shadow swept through the air and hit the lake like a whip, stirring up thousands of waves. These waves soared into the air but turned into ice. The next moment, there was another fierce roar from the bottom of the lake. All the water droplets that were about to fall and turn into ice rushed up like sharp thorns. They were like thousands of arrows that covered most of the sky. Horny's face changed. He hurriedly used his wings to protect his body and rose higher. Even so, when the ice droplets fell on his wings, he still felt the coldness and pain. He was horrified. Although he expected that the strength of the ice dragon was extraordinary, he didn't expect it to be so terrifying. Just the ice droplets caused by the roar could hurt him. There was a trace of shock in the eyes of Dean, Barker, and Monica. Although they weren't horny and didn't personally guard the lake, they were also experts and could see the door at a glance. This is by no means an ordinary abyss. Dean was shocked. At this time, a burst of white water suddenly shot out from the lake and hit Horny. Horny hurriedly dodged, and at the same time, once again increased his altitude and flew towards the lake. Roar! A dragon's roar resounded, and the lake water surged, washing the shore. In the next instant, the surface of the lake swelled up, and a gigantic silhouette soared up from the lake. In an instant, it covered the sky, and everyone felt as if the entire sky above their heads had darkened. Dean's mouth was slightly open, and he was stunned. What kind of gigantic dragon was this? The dragon's wings were as huge as a sail. Its body was inclined to the structure of a western dragon, but it didn't have the feeling of a salamander. The head of its upper body was similar to that of a flood dragon. The top of its head was like a dense icicle. At this time, Dean discovered that the shadow he saw in the lake was actually the slender tail behind it. Just that tail alone was more than 10 meters long. The warriors of the hunting group were also shocked, including Monica and Barker. There was a bit of absent-mindedness in their eyes. Could this image of an ancient fiend god really match up to him? Dean's first thought was to turn around and run. Chapter 9:10. The Arctic ice dragon flew out of the lake and chased after Harani. Before Harani could fly to the shore, it had already caught up with him. From the dragon's mouth, a cloud of white mist suddenly formed on Harani's body, and the speed at which his wings flapped slowed down. Holland was shocked and anxious. The thorns on his wings protruded as he shook off the frost and swooped towards the ground. But the speed of polar ice dragon was faster. Its claws fell from the sky and caught Holland. Holland was horrified as he struggled violently. The dragon's claws shrank and made cracking sounds. Holland's mouth overflowed with blood. "Save me. I can't hold it anymore." Dean and others who were ambushing in the forest were stunned by the scene. There was a trace of hesitation in Dean's eyes when he heard Holland's roar. He could see that Holland wasn't pretending this time. He was really panicking. The reason why he hesitated was that he was worried about the polar ice dragon. It took only a few seconds for Holland to capture Holland. He may not be able to resist such a force. At this time, his heart was beating the drums of retreat. Although it sounded ridiculous, but the fact was that he was not a rookie. He could see the power of the polar ice dragon at a glance. It would be difficult to deal with it by relying on the few of them, let alone kill it, unless Baker and others had hidden strength beyond their imagination. While he was hesitating, Monica hurriedly whispered, "Let's restrain it. We can't wait any longer, or something will really happen to him." Baker's face was dignified. No one knew what he was thinking. After Monica finished, he looked at Dean. "What do you think?" Dean's heart moved as he looked at Baker. When he saw the indifference in Baker's eyes, he suddenly understood that the relationship between the Wall Lord and Holland and Monica wasn't as intimate as before. They were not in the same camp. Although he didn't say it, but Dean could see that he wanted to give up on Holland or continue to wait to force out Holland's cards. Monica saw that Dean and Barker didn't say anything. She immediately understood their thoughts. Her face slightly changed, but she didn't say anything. She looked up at Horny, who was caught in the claws of the ice dragon. Her eyes were deep. Horny roared twice, but there was no movement from the edge of the forest. Even his own guards didn't respond. His heart was angry, but at the same time, he was a bit cold. He no longer expected Dean to help him. When the cold from the dragon claw spread to his whole body, he fiercely clenched his teeth. A large amount of black mucus oozed out from the roots of the wings. It looked like a lot of black sweat. More and more mucus gushed out and stuck to the dragon claws. Suddenly, black smoke rose from the dragon claws that were as clear as ice. The next moment, Harani roared and broke free from the dragon claws. As soon as he broke free from the dragon's claws, he rushed into the forest. The previous black mucus seemed to be poisonous gas. As soon as it appeared, there was a strange smell in the air, which made his head a little dizzy. It seemed that this was one of Royal's cards. Although he knew that Royal was good at using poison, he did not expect the toxicity to be so terrible. Just smelling the smell would make him uncomfortable. It should be known that Royal's ability to resist poison was not weak. Most of the other pioneers would feel uncomfortable after smelling this smell. Roar! The polar ice dragon seemed to be angry. A large amount of cold air came out of its palm and froze the black mucus. It twisted its body and chased after Holland again. Holland rushed straight into the forest, followed by the polar ice dragon. When its head reached the edge of the forest, suddenly a burst of fire shot out from the sand and instantly enveloped the polar ice dragon like a sea of fire. It was the warriors of the hunting group who were lying in ambush at the edge of the forest. At the same time, hundreds of flaming arrows were launched in the forest. The fire cut through the air and hit the polar ice dragon's head and wings, making tinkling sounds. The fire arrows bounced off as if they hit metal. Some fell on the leaves of the forest and were immediately ignited. Dean, Monica, and Barker, who were hiding behind the tree, immediately launched into action. Now that Holland's task was completed, it was their turn to make a move. Whoosh! Whoosh! Monica and Barkle were the first to rush out. Monica entered her demon form, and her skin turned snow white. White powder fell from her body and wings. The powder did not fall. Under the control of her wings, the wind blew onto the Arctic frost dragon's head and claws. Barkle, on the other hand, rushed in front of the Arctic frost dragon and slashed at its claws with his bone sword. With a swoosh, the bone sword left a shallow mark on the dragon's claw. The huge recoil caused Baker's wrist to hurt. His pupils constricted slightly. It was only at this moment that he clearly realized that this Arctic frost dragon was even more terrifying than he had expected. Roar! The polar ice dragon roared and waved its claws toward Barker. Barker hurriedly dodged and avoided the dragon's claws. Dean had already rushed out and appeared at the side of the polar ice dragon. He quickly entered the demonic state and slashed towards the side of the polar ice dragon's abdomen. Ice Dragon, who was about to attack Baker, suddenly retracted its hand. It flapped its wings, and soared into the sky. At the same time, it issued a loud and clear roar. It looked down at Dean. Its dark blue eyes were full of mania. It opened its mouth and spat out a large amount of cold air. Dean was startled as he didn't expect the polar ice dragon to dodge his attack. He felt that the polar ice dragon's mood had suddenly become intense. It seemed that it was angered. He didn't dare to face the white frost and quickly descended. Damn! Barker's face turned ugly as he saw that Dean's sneak attack failed. He looked at Monica. It seems that your trick didn't work. Call Holland over. The three of us will contain it. Let Dean attack alone. Their previous plan was that Dean would attack while they would contain the polar ice dragon. After all, Dean's attack ability was stronger than any of them. Monica's ability was biased towards perception. Although her attack wasn't weak and her means were somewhat strange, her frontal attack was far from being able to hurt the polar ice dragon's life, even if it was motionless and let her attack. Monica took a deep breath. She knew that it was time to take out her cards. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to play any role in this battle. She was about to attack again when the polar ice dragon's roar echoed from the sky. The next moment, the polar ice dragon swooped down and chased after Dean. Dean's face changed as he rushed to the side of Barker and others. Barker quickly leaped into the air and swung his bone sword at the Arctic frost dragon's claw. However, the Arctic frost dragon was much more violent than before. With a swipe of its claw, it slammed Barker into the ground at lightning speed, creating a deep crater. The polar ice dragon didn't look at him as it continued to chase after Dean. Dean was confused as he saw the situation behind him. He felt that the polar ice dragon was staring at him. I haven't met you yet. Why are you so vengeful? He couldn't help but curse in his heart. But his feet didn't stop as he ran towards Holland, who was resting on the branches of the forest. Holland's face turned black as he saw Dean rush towards him. He wanted to rest for a while. He wanted to force Dean and others to use their cards. The previous operation was beyond his expectations. He thought that he could smoothly lead the polar ice dragon to the edge of the forest and fall into the ambush. But the result was that he almost fell into the trap. The strength of the polar ice dragon was much stronger than he had imagined. It was by no means a level 372 monster. Help me contain it, Dean shouted as he saw Holland. Holland's mouth twitched, but he still got up and flew towards the polar ice dragon behind Dean. Roar! The polar ice dragon seemed to feel the threat as it saw Holland rushing towards it, but it refused to stop and madly issued a high-pitched roar. The leaves rustled, and the next moment, the Arctic ice dragon opened its mouth and spat out a cloud of snow-white cold air. Horny, who bore the brunt of the attack, changed his expression and quickly dodged. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.